Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. It started with a letter, one of those strange, thick, old-fashioned envelopes, the kind sealed with actual wax. No return address. No sender. Just his name written in a neat, slanted script that looked like it had been penned with a quill dipped in something thicker than ink. Dr. Elias Vantner paused before opening it. The wind scratched against the windows of his small apartment, though the sky was calm. It was the kind of night where everything felt slightly off, even the quiet. Inside, the letter was brief. To the last of the Vantner line. The property at Black Pines Lodge is now yours. Come before the frost sets in. There is much to remember. Much to reclaim. Warden of the Wood. No signature. Just that odd title. No legal jargon. No mention of a solicitor. Just a location scribbled at the bottom in red ink that looked faded and crusted like dried blood. Elias had never heard of the place. He'd grown up in foster homes with no known family. The name Vantner was all he had. A surname passed through the system like an empty box. He'd searched before, once obsessively, but there had been no traces. No ancestry records. No graves. No roots. Until now. The forest came into view 5 days later, after a 6-hour drive, followed by a 2-hour detour down a winding gravel road that wasn't listed on any GPS. The deeper he went, the more the trees leaned in, black pines, thick and tall, like ancient sentinels watching from the roadside. They seemed to close behind him as he passed, branches arching overhead. And though it was barely late afternoon, the light had already begun to dim. Moss coated every trunk, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp soil and something older, like burnt paper and ash. Elias adjusted his glasses and kept his grip tight on the wheel. Eventually, a rusted gate came into view. It hung open, chained loosely to one side. A weather-beaten sign dangled beside it, the wood cracked and warped. Black Pines Lodge. EST 1813. Private grounds, entry by bloodline only. He frowned at the last line. The tires crunched over pine needles and rocks as he crossed the threshold. The road narrowed. Twisted vines and root-pulled earth overtook sections of the path until it was barely navigable. His rental car lurched and groaned in protest. And then, there it was. The lodge. Massive. Silent. Half hidden by fog. It sat hunched against a slope at the edge of a blackened ravine, its peaked roof buried in ivy, windows dark and hollow like empty eyes. 3 stories tall with stone chimneys and crooked shingles, it looked less like a vacation retreat and more like a relic unearthed from another time. A single lantern flickered beside the front door, but no one stood outside. No caretaker. No groundskeeper. No welcome. Inside, the air was freezing and thick with dust. Elias stepped cautiously into the entry hall, boots echoing on warped floorboards. An enormous hearth sat dead at the far end, cold stone stretching up to the vaulted ceiling. The walls were paneled with dark wood, carved intricately with symbols he didn't recognize, loops, spirals, and jagged lines that seemed to shift in the corner of his eye. Cobwebs veiled chandeliers. An iron chandelier above creaked gently, as if stirred by breath rather than wind. He turned in a slow circle. There were books stacked in alcoves and strange paintings on the walls. Portraits of unsmiling people in black clothes with pale eyes. One woman had a mark across her forehead, like a faded scar or a carved rune. In another painting, a young boy stood beside a tall man with his face hidden in shadow. Something about the way they were positioned. Elias couldn't tell who was the parent and who was the child. He shivered. There was a guest book on a small wooden stand by the door. The pages were yellowed and torn. He flipped to the last entry, half expecting it to be blank. But there was a name. Isaac Vantner, 1973. He blinked at the surname. Elias had never heard of an Isaac in his life. And the date was over 50 years ago. He glanced behind him. The door remained open, but the fog had thickened outside. The forest beyond had grown darker, deeper, quieter, like it had swallowed the road. Upstairs, the rooms were locked. Each door had a symbol carved into it, different ones. Circles, stars, crescent shapes, all scratched in, not painted. Some had old stains beneath them, brown and crusted. He stopped at the last room on the second floor. Unlike the others, it had no carving. Just a single, tarnished doorknob. It opened easily. Inside, the dust was thinner. The bed was made, and an oil lamp sat already lit on the desk, though Elias had touched nothing. A small leather journal rested beside it. Its cover was marked with a single emblem, a pine tree surrounded by a ring of thorns. The first page was written in a rough, heavy hand. The woods are older than the lodge. The lodge is older than the name, and the name is older than I ever knew. If you're reading this, then the forest has chosen again. Elias sat slowly in the chair and stared at the words. Outside, the trees creaked like old bones. A shape moved past the window, too tall to be a deer, too fast to be a person. And somewhere below, from the base of the ravine, something howled. Not a wolf, not a man, something else. The journal trembled slightly in Elias's hands, not from the air, but from something deeper, something unspoken that hummed in the fibers of the lodge itself. It wasn't fear, not yet, but it was something close. Something like standing at the edge of a frozen lake and hearing the ice begin to crack beneath your feet. He stared at the strange inscription again. If you're reading this, then the forest has chosen again. The words were scrawled in thick strokes of ink, messy and desperate. He turned the page carefully, flakes of age and dust fluttering off the yellowed paper. The next entry was dated March 12, 1973. Day 1. I arrived this morning. They told me to come alone. I thought I was inheriting land. I didn't know I was inheriting a task. The lodge is waking up. The trees watch at night. There is something under the basement floor. Something that knows my name. I don't know how. I never told it. Elias stopped, scanning the page again. Under the basement floor? He flipped forward, more entries, each more frantic than the last. Day 5. I heard footsteps in the attic again. I checked. It was empty. The mirror in room 6 cracked at midnight. All the symbols are glowing faintly now, like coals in a dying fire. The book said they were protective. But against what? Day 11. I saw her again. At the edge of the forest. The woman with no eyes. She mouths something, but I can't hear it over the wind. She's closer now. I don't think she's alone anymore. Elias shut the journal slowly, pulsed loud in his ears. The lantern's flame flickered wildly for a moment, though the room was still. He scanned the desk again, noticing something he had missed before, a small brass key wedged into a groove near the back. The metal was cold, even in the warmth of the flame. No tag, no number, just one key. He slipped it into his coat pocket and stood. The hallway outside felt narrower now. The shadows had thickened, stretching up the walls like smoke. Elias glanced at the other doors again, symbols carved into wood, some fresher than others, some so worn they looked almost erased. He ran his fingers along the wall as he moved, noting how the temperature seemed to drop near certain rooms, and how the wood under his touch sometimes pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat in the grain. The staircase creaked beneath his weight as he descended. The lobby looked darker than before, though the sky hadn't changed outside. The fire in the hearth was still unlit, but a pile of old wood had been stacked there. A long metal poker leaned nearby, stained dark with rust, or something else. Elias passed it by. At the far side of the lobby, behind a faded velvet curtain, he found a locked door. Heavy. Reinforced. No markings. Just a thick keyhole set in tarnished iron. He pulled out the brass key and hesitated, then slowly slid it in. It turned with a grinding sound like bone against stone. The door creaked open into total blackness. The stairs led down into a tight corridor beneath the lodge. Stone walls, low ceiling, the scent of mildew and rot. The air was dense, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. Dust danced in his lantern light like ash. Cobwebs brushed against his face. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a wide underground chamber. It was not part of any normal lodge design. The room had been carved directly into the earth. The walls were lined with old stones fitted together by hand, mottled with moss and black residue. In the center sat a stone slab surrounded by rings of symbols, etched into the ground in some oily, tar-like substance. Stale candles sat in broken holders around the perimeter, as if someone had performed a ritual here, and then fled. The slab looked like an altar. Or worse, a table for something to be placed or sacrificed. Elias moved cautiously toward it. There were scraps of parchment scattered nearby. Torn pages, each one smeared with symbols and fragments of writing. She waits beneath. Do not break the line. The 13th room is the gate. They come when you forget the names. The soil remembers what we buried. Then a sound. A creaking. Low and slow. Not from above. From below. He stepped back instinctively. One of the stones in the floor began to shift, just slightly. Like something underneath had nudged it. Like fingers brushing the bottom of a coffin lid. The slab gave a soft groan. He ran. Back in the lodge, Elias slammed the basement door shut and turned the key so hard it snapped in the lock. His chest heaved. His breath fogged in front of him. A long silence. Then, thud, from behind the door. Not a knock. A push. Then another. He staggered back, heart pounding, eyes scanning the lobby. That's when he noticed it. The painting. One of the portraits, an old man with gray eyes, had changed. The man's mouth was open now, and the background was darker, almost forest-like. A smudge had appeared beside him, too. A vague shape. A second figure that hadn't been there before. Elias turned away. A loud crack echoed upstairs, followed by slow, dragging footsteps across the wooden floor above. Room by room. Stepping. Pausing. Listening. He lit the fireplace out of instinct, something primal. As the flame took, the room shifted. Shadows danced differently. Warped faces flickered briefly across the walls, gone before he could look straight at them. Then came a whisper. From nowhere. From everywhere. "Welcome back, Elias." He froze. The lodge knew his name. He hadn't spoken a word. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat in the armchair by the hearth, journal in his lap, the fire crackling in uneven bursts. Shadows moved like breath across the walls, pulling longer every time he blinked. The whisper still lingered in the back of his mind. "Welcome back, Elias." It repeated softly, like the memory of a voice long buried but somehow familiar. But he had no memory of this place. None of this made sense. The fire died low around 3 in the morning. A frigid wind slipped in through the cracks in the window panes, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine needles soaked in frost. Outside, the forest was unnaturally still. Too still. No birds. No insects. Not even the shifting of trees in the wind. Elias rubbed his temples and opened the journal again. The entries were scattered, erratic. But there was a pattern buried in the madness. Clues hidden between the scrawled lines and growing desperation of Isaac Vantner, the last known person to stay in the lodge. One entry stood out. Day 18. The runes change at night. There are only 12 during the day, but I've counted 13 after midnight. Room 13 doesn't exist on any of the lodge's blueprints. And yet, it's always there. The door appears near the south wing staircase, behind the tapestry. Don't open it. Don't look too long at the walls. And whatever you do, don't follow the singing. Elias stared at that last sentence. Singing? He rose from the chair, grabbing the lantern from the mantel. It flickered dimly, barely cutting through the growing haze that seemed to settle across the interior of the lodge as night deepened. Dust spiraled in the air like it was alive, drifting lazily through the beams of light. He made his way toward the south wing staircase, his boots creaking on every other step. The walls were lined with portraits again, faces that were all too human, but something about their expressions felt staged. Forced smiles, wide eyes, as though the people painted had been told to pretend they weren't terrified. The south hallway curved slightly, descending half a level. The wooden banister was cracked and damp to the touch, like it had absorbed the breath of 100 winters. And then he saw it. A massive red tapestry stretched across the wall at the end of the hallway. He hadn't noticed it before. It hung perfectly still, despite the cold breeze whispering through the rest of the lodge. It depicted something strange. A woman in a black veil standing in a forest clearing, arms raised. Around her, twisted figures danced in a circle, antlers and masks obscuring their faces. The trees behind them bent toward the center of the scene like they were watching. Or worshipping. Elias reached out. The fabric felt wrong. Not cloth. More like thick skin or old leather. He pushed it aside. And there it was. Room 13. The door looked older than the others. It was made of rough, dark wood, deeply scarred by what looked like claw marks. No knob. No lock. Just a small indent where fingers had worn a groove over time. Elias leaned in, hesitating. The moment his palm brushed the wood, a soft sound bloomed from behind the door. Music. No, not quite music. More like humming. A woman's voice. Low, distant, lilting. Wordless but heavy with sadness. It grew slightly louder the longer he listened, as if recognizing that someone was near. He stepped back quickly, heart hammering. This wasn't right. He turned to leave, but the hallway behind him had changed. There were no doors. No stairs. No tapestry. Just solid wall. Knotty and damp, smelling of cedar and mildew. His lantern dimmed. The humming behind him intensified. Elias turned back around. The door to room 13 was open. Inside was wrong. There was no furniture. No floor. Just a wide expanse of forest. A forest that should not have been there. Pine trees stretched out endlessly beneath a starless sky. A thin mist weaved between them like fingers dragging through water. The smell was thick, wet moss, rotting wood, and something chemical underneath. Elias stepped closer to the threshold. The ground inside looked soft, too soft, like it would swallow him if he stepped forward. And in the far distance something stood, a figure, tall, thin, wearing a black shroud, face obscured by a pale mask with empty holes for eyes. The humming came from her. The melody drifted on a breeze that didn't reach his skin. She tilted her head slowly as if acknowledging him, then raised her arm, not in greeting, but in summoning. Behind her the forest moved. Not trees, not animals, people, dozens, maybe hundreds, their forms half seen in the fog, walking slowly through the mist toward her, toward him, all humming now, the same tune. Elias stepped back, reaching for the door frame, but his hand struck nothing. The lodge was gone. He was no longer standing in a hallway. He was inside. The room was gone. The lodge was gone. Only forest, only fog, only the humming. He turned and ran. Branches clawed at his clothes. Roots buckled beneath his feet. The fog thickened. The humming grew louder, warping into something unnatural, tones colliding, layered voices building like a chorus of the dead. Behind him, he heard the shuffling of bare feet on moss, the slow thud of something massive moving between the trees. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The forest went on forever. No matter which direction he turned, it was the same. Black bark, white mist, and the shadowed figures watching silently from the trees. And then, a light, dim, flickering. He ran toward it with everything he had left. He broke through the mist and collapsed onto wooden boards, cold, hard, familiar. The lantern was still in his hand. The south wing hallway stretched out in front of him, just as it had before. The tapestry fluttered closed behind him on its own. Elias lay there for a moment, breathing hard, staring at the ceiling. Something sticky clung to his sleeve. He lifted his arm and saw it, pine sap. But it was black, and it moved slightly like it was alive. He scraped it off, but a faint symbol was now marked on his wrist. A circle of thorns, the same as the one on the journal. He got up slowly and turned down the hallway. The portraits watched silently, and in one of them, at the very edge of the frame, he swore he saw himself, standing in the forest, beside the masked woman, smiling. The next morning began without sun. Elias woke to a dim gray haze filtering through the heavy lodge curtains, the kind of half-light that gave no clue what time it really was. His eyes were dry, and every muscle in his body ached like he'd been walking all night through wet snow. The fire had gone out long ago, leaving only cold ashes in the hearth. He hadn't made it back to the bedroom. Instead, he was lying in the lounge chair near the lobby fireplace, the journal open across his chest. The mark on his wrist still pulsed faintly, faint red lines circling in a twisted thorny loop. At first he had thought it was a burn, but it didn't hurt. It hummed. He sat up slowly, checking the journal again. The entries about room 13 were still there. He hadn't imagined it. The forest, the masked woman, the procession of silent people moving through the trees, they had all been real, somehow. And now the lodge felt different. He walked carefully to the front windows and pulled the curtain aside. The forest outside was closer. Not just thicker, closer. Trees that had been a dozen meters from the porch were now nearly pressed against the windows. Moss clung to the outside glass. Long streaks of moisture dripped like tears. The sky above was a solid sheet of gray. And something else. There were footprints in the frost-covered ground just below the porch. Bare feet, human, leading up to the door and stopping there. Elias backed away from the window. The mark on his wrist throbbed once, sharp and deliberate. Then came the sound, creaking floorboards somewhere above. Not the kind made by settling wood. These were footsteps, slow, intentional. He crept back up the staircase, staying close to the wall, avoiding every known creak in the boards. His eyes darted to the paintings as he passed. They hadn't changed this time. At least, not visibly. But some of the faces now seemed slightly turned, as if watching, as if following him. He made it to the second floor and paused at the hallway intersection. Then, click. A door ahead of him unlatched itself and opened just a crack. Room 6. The same room Isaac Vantner mentioned in his journal, the one where the mirror had cracked on its own. The door stood slightly ajar, revealing only darkness inside. Elias inched closer, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He reached the threshold and nudged the door open slowly, the hinges groaning like something breathing its last breath. The room inside was cold. A mirror stretched from floor to ceiling along the far wall, its surface fogged in strange streaks that didn't seem caused by moisture. The bed was untouched. The curtains were drawn. In the mirror, it was cracked. A spiderweb fracture ran across it from the center, but behind the break, the reflection moved. Not with him. Not like a proper mirror. It was delayed. Or perhaps, watching from the other side. Then the reflection blinked. But Elias hadn't. He froze. In the mirror, his double stood perfectly still except for its eyes. Its expression slowly twisted, not in horror but into a faint, creeping smile. The kind a predator makes when it knows its prey has nowhere left to run. Elias stepped back. The smile faded. The reflection's mouth moved slightly. Not opening, just shaping a word. Over and over again. Open. 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 He turned and fled the room, slamming the door behind him. Back in the hallway, Elias doubled over, gripping his knees, trying to control his breathing. The journal thudded softly against his chest inside his coat. His wrist pulsed again, hotter now. Something was changing. He checked the hallway. The other doors were still shut tight, their carved symbols unchanged. All but one. Room 2. The symbol above that door had been scraped off. Not faded. Removed. Fresh gouges in the wood where something had dug it out. As if the lodge had been trying to protect that room once, and now it no longer could. He stepped forward, reaching for the handle. But before he could touch it, the door opened on its own. Inside was a library, or what used to be one. Tall shelves lined the walls, most of them shattered or collapsed. Books lay in moldy piles across the floor. A chair was overturned. Candles burned dimly on a table in the center, though no one had lit them. The air smelled of damp paper and rot. Elias stepped inside, careful not to touch anything. Something about the room felt thin, like walking into a stage set made of skin and memory. At the far end was a book left open on a wooden lectern. Its pages fluttered despite the still air. He approached slowly, his boots crunching on broken glass and warped pages. The book was handbound. Leather cover. No title. Inside were entries written in ink darker than any he'd seen. The lodge was not built. It was summoned. The land was chosen not for its beauty, but for what sleeps beneath. Blood built the walls. Names carved the doors. The forest was promised something, and it has waited long enough. Below the passage, a handprint was pressed into the page. But it wasn't ink. It was charred into the paper. As he leaned in to inspect it, the candles flared, bright, and the door behind him slammed shut. Books flew from the shelves, hurling themselves across the room as if caught in a storm. Pages ripped free and swirled in the air like birds with no wings. The ground shook once, twice, and a deep, wet cracking sound echoed from beneath the floorboards. Elias ducked beneath the table, heart thundering. A voice hissed through the room, soft and ragged. "It's not your lodge yet." He bolted for the door, yanking it open and stumbling back into the hallway. The books dropped silent behind him. The candles died instantly. And the mark on his wrist? It had bloomed further. Now it pulsed with slow red light, like a heartbeat not entirely his own. He returned to the main lobby in a daze, pausing at the base of the stairs. The journal slid from his coat pocket and fell open on the floor. A new entry was written there. One he hadn't written. One that hadn't been there before. Day 1, Elias Vantner has arrived. The forest remembers. The doors will open soon. And beneath it, a smudged ink sketch of Elias, standing in the forest clearing, surrounded by masked figures, one of them holding a knife. Elias didn't bother closing the journal. He stared at the page until the flickering firelight made the words blur, then finally picked it up and tucked it under his arm. The air in the lodge felt heavier now, as though every breath he took disturbed something ancient and sleeping in the walls. He could feel the pulse of the mark on his wrist syncing with the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the lobby, a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a countdown that only the house understood. It was subtle but undeniable. Something had changed. The lodge had acknowledged him. Worse, it had included him. He needed answers. Real ones. Leaving the warmth of the dying fire behind, he moved across the lobby and approached the old wooden stand that held the guest book, the one he'd seen on his first day here. The leather-bound ledger was cracked at the spine, thick with dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades. When he opened it, the pages sighed like they were waking up, and he was immediately struck by how many names were scrawled across the parchment in faint, fading ink. Dozens of guests, some with dates going back as far as the late 1800s, each entry recorded in a tight, looping script. But the farther back he turned, the more erratic the handwriting became, crossed-out names, red ink blotches, notes written in languages he didn't recognize. Then came a page marked with a single black X. Below it, a list of names hastily scribbled and followed by short, cryptic notations. Carl M. Did not sleep. Tomas K. broke the seal. Taken. Ivy escaped the forest once. Marked. Walter B. never left the mirror. And near the bottom of the list, written in what looked like dried blood, Elias V. the last gate. He stared at the words for a long time. The implication was clear. They had been waiting for him. Not just for another visitor. For him, specifically. He snapped the book shut, heart pounding. The whisper came again, this time so close he could feel it against his ear, soft, cold, and utterly void of breath. You came back. You left once, but now you're ready. Elias spun around, but there was no one there. The lobby was empty, shadows curling along the floor, stretching outward like reaching fingers. He backed away from the stand, bumping into the old wooden reception desk. A drawer beneath it slid open on its own, and inside, resting atop a moth-eaten map of the surrounding forest, was a rusted iron key. Its teeth were jagged, and the handle was shaped like a tree root twisted into a spiral. He picked it up slowly, holding it between his fingers. The metal was warm. Too warm. Attached was a tag, faded, water-damaged, barely legible. Cellar Vault, West Wing. Elias hadn't even realized there was a West Wing. He looked toward the far side of the lobby where a hallway branched off into the dark, one he hadn't explored yet. The air that drifted from it was colder than the rest of the lodge, damp and carrying a faint coppery scent. The lights overhead had long since gone out, and the carpet that lined the floor was shredded in places, as though animals had clawed at it from beneath. With the key in hand and the journal tucked under his arm, he took a deep breath and stepped into the west corridor. It was longer than it looked from the lobby. The hall seemed to stretch the deeper he walked, the walls slowly changing from wood paneling to stone, the ceiling sagging slightly with age. Doors lined either side, most of them hanging open with their hinges rusted and bent. The rooms were all empty, storage spaces filled with broken furniture, cobwebs, and crumbling bookshelves. None of them matched the style of the rest of the lodge. These looked older. Much older. At the end of the hallway he found the cellar vault door. It was massive, made of heavy iron with a series of strange markings etched into the surface. Not symbols like the ones carved into the bedroom doors, but something more elaborate, like an entire story had been written into the steel. He traced one of the spirals with his fingers, noticing how the lines intersected with shapes that resembled eyes, trees, and what might have been roots stretching into open mouths. The key slid into the lock easily, almost like the door had been waiting for it. When it clicked open, a gust of cold air surged out, and the lantern Elias carried nearly died. He steadied it and stepped inside. The vault wasn't what he expected. It wasn't full of wine or food or tools. It was a wide, circular chamber lined with mirrors. Dozens of them, all mounted onto wooden frames that were carved with pine branches and skulls. The mirrors didn't reflect him. Not properly. Instead, each one showed something different. One showed a forest path with no end. Another showed a man screaming silently in a room full of shadows. Another showed a woman in a long veil standing in a clearing with her arms raised to the sky. Some of the mirrors flickered between scenes like broken televisions. But one showed the lodge. From above. As though viewed from high in the trees. Elias saw the rooftop, the winding path that led up to the front gate, and a shape. A person, standing alone in the clearing. His breath caught as he realized it was him. The version in the mirror looked directly up. And smiled. Elias turned away and tried to step back, but the vault door slammed shut behind him. Panic flared. He rushed to the handle, pulling hard, but it wouldn't budge. He banged his fist on the metal, shouting, "Let me out!" Then silence, until a whisper returned, this time coming from the mirrors themselves. Dozens of voices, all speaking at once in quiet harmony. She waits. She remembers. She is hungry. She is near. The lights above flickered, and something began to crawl across the floor of the vault, thin black vines that slithered like snakes, curling toward his boots. He backed up toward the center of the room, heart racing. The mark on his wrist burned now. Not pulsed, burned. He looked down. The symbol had changed again. Now it resembled an open eye inside the thorn circle, and around it, tiny cracks had begun to form across his skin, as though the mark was spreading, or splitting. A hum filled the room, low and deep and vibrating through the floor like the rumble of something massive turning over in its sleep. Then one of the mirrors shattered. Not all of it, just the center. And from that dark circle of broken glass, something emerged. A hand. Thin. Gray. Wet-looking, with long fingers that clicked unnaturally as they stretched outward. Another hand followed. Then a face began to push through the mirror, slowly, too slowly, like a head being birthed from a sheet of water. It was pale and mask-like, no eyes, no nose, just a mouth that stretched far too wide. It began to grin, a black substance dripping from its lips. Elias stumbled backward, desperate to find another way out. He shoved against the mirror beside him, but it wouldn't budge. He turned to the one that had shown him in the forest. It was dark now, empty. And then the vault door opened. No sound. Just a slight pressure change, like the room exhaling. He didn't hesitate. He ran. The hallway outside seemed darker than before. No lights. No air. The shadows chased him, curling along the floor behind his heels like a rising tide. He made it to the lobby and slammed the hallway door shut behind him. Then silence. No footsteps. No breath. Just the ticking of the grandfather clock and the soft crackling of fire from the hearth, as though none of it had happened. But when he looked down at his wrist, the mark was no longer glowing. It was bleeding. And across the wall above the fireplace, scratched deeply into the wood, was a new message. You opened the first. The next morning brought no sunlight, just a dull gray pall that filtered in through the fog-covered windows. Elias awoke to the sound of wood settling, the lodge groaning faintly in its old bones. He hadn't remembered falling asleep. The journal still lay open on the desk beside him, the ink on the last page slightly smudged, as if someone had touched it during the night. The lamp had gone out, but the scent of burnt oil still lingered, thick in the room like a warning. After splashing cold water on his face from the enameled basin in the corner and shivering in the still air, he moved through the lodge with a slow, cautious rhythm, trying to get his bearings. The creaking steps beneath his weight, the peeling wallpaper along the second-floor hall, and the faded portraits that watched silently, all of it made the place feel half-living, like the house itself had breath and memory and would someday speak. He wandered into the main hall, stepping over a crooked floorboard near the hearth. A sudden, sharp creak beneath his boot made him pause. He shifted his foot back. The plank was loose, warped at the edges, just enough to suggest it had been pried up before, years ago, maybe more. Curiosity stirred beneath his unease. He dropped to one knee, wedged his fingers along the edge, and with some effort pulled the board free. Beneath the plank, wrapped tightly in what looked like oilskin, was a bundle. Elias's heart pounded as he lifted it out, half expecting bones or brittle pages. But it was soft, paper or maybe parchment. Carefully, he unwrapped the folds and found himself staring at a hand-drawn map, yellowed with age and covered in smudged annotations. The forest was sketched in dense black ink, its borders jagged and irregular. The lodge was marked dead center, and branching out from it were several paths, some solid, others dashed or crossed out entirely. But what drew his attention was the symbols. They were scrawled across the forest, sigils he recognized from the door carvings upstairs. Each path led to one of these marks, and each had a note beside it written in that same heavy, frantic hand from the journal. He read them aloud in a whisper. The Watcher's Hollow. The Teeth Tree. The Pool Where Eyes Bloom. He swallowed. Chapel of the Rooted One. Beneath the map, another note had been scribbled in the margin. If the seal fails, light must return to the spine. Begin with the south path, but only at dusk. The forest forgets by day but remembers at night. Elias lowered the map slowly. A new layer of fear coiled in his stomach, not panic but a cold certainty. The forest outside wasn't just wilderness. It was designed. It had routes, rituals, memory, and it wanted something from him. Later that day, as dusk began to settle and the light turned gold against the black tree line, Elias stood on the porch staring out toward the woods. The trees were unnaturally still. No birdsong, no wind, just a waiting quiet. He had the map tucked into a leather satchel and the lantern lit and swinging gently at his side. He packed some food, matches, a knife, and the journal. Every sensible instinct told him not to go into the forest. But there was something deeper pulling him now. A compulsion like gravity. Maybe it was blood. Maybe it was the lodge. Maybe it was something older. He stepped off the porch and followed the mossy path south, his boots crunching softly as pine needles thickened underfoot. The deeper he went, the colder it grew, though the air stayed still. Fog drifted between the trunks in long, thin ribbons, and the silence pressed in around him like cotton stuffed in his ears. After 30 minutes, the trees began to shift. The black pines twisted strangely here, some bent in arches, others hunched like figures caught in slow, silent motion. He followed the first path marked on the map toward what was labeled the Watcher's Hollow. The symbol beside it resembled an eye with roots for lashes. As the last light of day vanished behind the canopy, the lantern flickered. Elias paused. Something had moved ahead, just a ripple between the trees. It didn't make sound. It didn't rustle leaves. It was like a shadow within shadow walking just out of reach. He pressed forward. Soon he reached a clearing, oddly circular and ringed by pines that curved inward unnaturally, as if drawn by something at the center. And there, standing on a patch of bare earth, was a wooden totem, 10 feet tall, carved from a single tree trunk. It resembled a man but with no face, just a smooth surface where the features should have been, and arms that bent backward like broken wings. He didn't move closer. Not yet. Instead, he checked the journal, flipping until he found a sketch of the totem. Below it was written, "He watches in stillness. He listens in root. Never bow. Never blink." The lantern dimmed again, then flared. Elias turned quickly. Something had shifted in the trees. Just for a second. He was sure of it. But the moment passed. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the clearing. Immediately, the wind picked up, cold and dry. The totem didn't move, but a deep, vibrating sound filled the air, like a groan from the forest floor, so low it made his teeth buzz. Then the lantern died. Pitch black. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then a voice whispered directly behind his left ear, dry and hollow and barely human. "You blinked." Elias didn't scream. Not because he wasn't terrified he was, but because his throat locked up. The moment he heard the whisper, his body froze. His muscles refused to obey. He stood there in the clearing, surrounded by the unnatural circle of trees, lantern extinguished, the chill of the forest wrapping around him like wet cloth. Somewhere nearby, something shifted in the darkness. Not walking, not stomping, just sliding, like roots writhing under wet earth. His eyes tried to adjust to the dark, but there was nothing to see. The trees had become silhouettes of jagged black, the clearing a suffocating pool of shadow. Even the moon above had vanished, like the sky had folded in on itself. And then, ever so faintly, Elias saw it. The totem figure, the watcher, its smooth, faceless surface glowing faintly in the dark with a pale, greenish sheen. Not reflective, not luminous, more like it was pulsing, breathing. He took one careful step back. That's when he realized he wasn't alone in the clearing anymore. Behind him, something else was standing. He didn't dare turn, but he felt it. The heavy presence of something tall, leaning toward him with a weight that wasn't physical but psychic, pressing down on his thoughts. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might bruise his ribs. Cold sweat traced his back. He remembered the journal's words, "Never bow, never blink." But he had blinked. The whisper had said it. You blinked. He hadn't meant to, but in the instant his eyes closed, something had moved. Something saw. He turned slowly, agonizingly slowly, and brought the map out of the satchel with trembling hands, not because it would help him see, but because it was the only thing grounding him. The lantern. He needed to relight it. Fire. Light. Safety. Anything. His fingers fumbled over the matches, heart thudding with such violence it made his vision swim. He struck one. It hissed to life, and in that brief golden flare he saw it. Not the watcher. Something behind the totem. In the shadows where the trees bent in unnatural arches, a figure stood, tall, thin, its limbs too long and ending in tapered root-like fingers. Its head tilted sideways as if it didn't understand how heads were supposed to move. And where a face should have been, there was only bark. No eyes, no mouth, but it saw him. The match went out. Darkness swallowed the clearing again. Elias backed away, counting his steps under his breath. 4 steps. 5. The ground dipped slightly and he staggered, boots scraping against roots he swore hadn't been there before. Then another whisper, this time a child's voice. No breath, no throat behind it, just words floating in the air. The watcher turns. The lodge listens. He struck another match and this time lit the lantern quickly, shielding the flame with his hand. The light flared up and he gasped. There was no figure now. No watcher. The clearing looked abandoned. Just crooked trees, damp soil, and the totem. So, faceless. But Elias knew something had changed. He felt it in his chest. Something had seen him. Had registered his presence. A veil had been lifted, and now the forest would not forget. Shaken, he turned and made his way back down the path, glancing over his shoulder every 10 paces. The forest seemed more alive now. Not with movement but with presence. He could feel eyes where there were none, pressure in the air like someone holding their breath just beside his ear. And all the while, the memory of the thing in the trees haunted his thoughts. That tall figure with root fingers and no face, watching with something deeper than sight. By the time he reached the lodge again, the lantern's light had dimmed to a faint orange glow. He stepped onto the porch and noticed something else. The front door, which he had locked, was open. Not wide, just a crack. He hesitated, reached for the journal, and then pushed the door slowly open with his boot. Inside, the lodge had changed. Not dramatically, but just enough to unsettle. The firewood he'd stacked earlier was now scattered across the floor in a perfect circle. The mirror in the hallway had been turned to face the wall. A set of muddy footprints, barefoot, led from the door to the base of the stairs and vanished without a trace. Elias closed the door behind him and locked it twice. He lit more lamps, bringing warm light to the walls, to the hearth, to the entryway. Slowly, the house began to feel normal again. A little warmer, a little safer. Then he saw the writing. On the wall above the fireplace, written in what looked like charcoal, or possibly something worse, was a short sentence, uneven and scrawled by someone who clearly hadn't written in a very long time. "The seal is broken." Elias stood in silence, staring at the message, the air growing heavier around him with every breath. He walked backward out of the room, sat down at the old writing desk in the corner of the lodge, and opened the journal again. The next entry, previously blank, now held fresh writing in a different hand. "Once the watcher sees, the doors begin to open. You must seal them again. All of them. Before the forest remembers what it lost." Below that was a list, symbols from the map, now arranged in a different order. A sequence maybe. A ritual? He didn't know. What he did know was that this wasn't just a haunting. This was a place of containment. Something had been sealed here, something ancient and wrong, and now it was waking up. The watcher was only the beginning, and the forest would not be quiet for much longer. Elias barely slept that night. Even behind the locked door of his room on the second floor, wrapped in thick quilts and surrounded by softly glowing lanterns, his eyes refused to close for long. Every time they did, his mind filled with glimpses of the faceless watcher, the whispering void in the trees, and the message above the hearth. "The seal is broken." That phrase repeated in his head like a curse, and it felt heavier with each repetition, as though it wasn't just a warning, it was a countdown. He finally gave up on sleep sometime just before dawn, the lodge still cloaked in deep shadow, the forest outside hidden beneath a thick fog that clung to the windows like webs. When Elias opened the journal again, more entries had appeared, not written by him, not even in his handwriting. The ink looked aged, cracked and grayed at the edges, like the words had been waiting in the pages all along, only now revealing themselves because he'd crossed some invisible threshold. One section caught his attention immediately. It was labeled simply, "The Doors of Black Pines." There were 7 of them. That's what the entry said. 7 doors, though Elias was certain it wasn't referring to anything so literal. These were symbols, bindings, old places deep in the woods meant to keep something in, or perhaps keep it out. Whatever their original purpose, the implication was clear. The Watcher's awakening had compromised one of them. If he didn't find and restore the rest, the lodge, and possibly far more than that, would be swallowed by the thing sleeping beneath the forest. He copied down the symbols, now arranged in a circular formation, each linked by a line drawn in smudged black ink. The first was the Watcher's totem, the circle he'd already visited. The next was marked with a broken fong, the third with what looked like an antler made of ash. The names beside each one sent chills down his spine: the hollow root, the maw of the oak, the crownless altar, the lake that sees, the backward path, the 7th gate. He felt like he was holding a blueprint to something ancient, dangerous, and half lost to time. A map to a prison that was failing. Outside, wind began to whip through the trees, rattling the window panes like claws on glass. He rose from the desk and peered out toward the forest. The fog had thickened into something unnatural, greenish-gray, shifting in waves, almost alive. Shapes moved in it that he couldn't quite make out, but he had the sense they weren't walking like humans. They glided, crawled, sank back into the mist when he stared too long. He needed to return to the forest. Not because he wanted to, but because something was urging him. The doors had to be found, and they wouldn't come to him. Grabbing his satchel, the lantern, and a small hatchet he'd found in a drawer by the fireplace, Elias stepped out onto the porch, locking the lodge behind him. The air hit him like a wet shroud, freezing, bitter, and filled with the kind of silence that made your teeth ache. He followed the path deeper into the woods, guided now not just by the old map but by something else. Intuition, maybe, or something far stranger. The second symbol, the one marked with the broken fong, seemed to pull at him from a place to the north. He crossed beneath the twisted arches of the pine trees, the needles falling like black snow, muffling his footsteps. Every now and then the forest let out a sound, an echo that wasn't quite an animal, not quite the wind. Just low vibrations like something big shifting beneath the soil. After nearly an hour, Elias saw the clearing. It looked nothing like the one with the watcher. This one was a gash in the forest, a raw wound where the trees had all snapped at odd angles, pointing inward toward a ring of jagged stones. At the center of the stones was a mound of earth that looked like a burial site, only it pulsed, just slightly, with each gust of wind as if the earth itself were breathing. This had to be the hollow root. He stepped inside the ring and immediately the air changed. A pressure built in his chest. His ears popped. The light from the lantern flickered, and somewhere beneath his feet, the earth gave a long, groaning sigh. Then he saw it, a dark crack in the mound no wider than a man's arm but deep, too deep to see the bottom. From it spilled a slow black mist. Not smoke. Not vapor. Something older. The moment it touched the edge of the ring, the wind died. The journal had said the doors must be sealed. Elias didn't know how, but his instincts told him this place could not be left open. He knelt beside the crack, feeling the heat radiating from it, like breath from a fevered animal. Pulling out a stick of chalk from the satchel, a strange thing to carry, but the journal had recommended it. He traced the symbol from the page around the opening, a jagged fong enclosed by a spiral. As he drew, the wind picked up again, swirling into the ring and carrying 1,000 tiny whispers with it. And then the earth screamed. A sound tore through the trees, high and long and filled with rage. The mound convulsed. Elias stumbled backward, his hands, roots, thrust out from the soil, grabbing for him, scratching at his boots, trying to drag him toward the crack. He swung the hatchet wildly, slicing through one gnarled vine and scrambling to his feet. The seal wasn't complete. He remembered the phrase from the journal, "Blood binds wood." With a grimace, he pulled out a pocket knife, slashed a line across his palm, and let the blood fall into the chalk spiral. The moment it touched the symbol, everything stopped. The wind, the roots, the screaming. The crack hissed and glowed faintly red before sealing shut like a mouth biting down. The mound went still. The ring of stones warmed slightly under his feet, and the oppressive pressure in the air lifted. He had done it. One door sealed. As he staggered away from the clearing, hand wrapped in a strip of cloth torn from his sleeve, Elias looked back and saw a figure standing just beyond the trees. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. But he knew it was watching. Not the faceless figure from before. This one had eyes. Dozens of them, blooming like white flowers across its bark-covered face. All wide open. All staring at him. He blinked and it was gone. Elias didn't run. He just turned and made his way slowly back toward the lodge, deeper into the cursed forest. The symbols burned into his memory. 6 doors remained. And the woods were only just beginning to wake. Elias had never known silence like this. So complete, so pressed in, it felt like a second skin wrapping around his skull. No wind. No night birds. No insects. Just the hollow echo of his own breath bouncing off trees that looked more like pillars of shadow than bark and branch. He hadn't realized how far he'd walked from the lodge. The path, once clear beneath his feet, had become something else. A soft, black moss that muffled every step and shimmered ever so slightly when touched by the lantern's reluctant glow. That same lantern had gone dim again. Not out, but flickering in reverse, as if the light wasn't escaping outward, but folding inward, curling around the flame and vanishing inside it. Elias held it up and squinted. The flame didn't burn yellow. It burned in shades of deep gray, like ash smeared over fire. Something was wrong with time here. He was sure of it. Not just the oddness of the air or the way the stars had shifted. He noticed that when he checked the sky, some of the constellations looked unfamiliar. What shook him more was the watch on his wrist. A wind-up model he'd inherited from his grandfather. It had always been reliable. Now the second hand twitched violently in place like it was trying to tick backward. Every few seconds it would jolt forward, then reverse like time couldn't quite decide which direction to flow. He pushed on, following the faint shapes of trees that seemed to lean away as he neared. The path had shifted again. No longer south, he was sure of it. The moss curled in delicate spirals now, like writing or symbols, but they twisted too fast to read, vanishing as he stepped over them, like the forest itself was editing its thoughts. And then he saw the lantern. Not his. A second lantern stood in the distance, placed in the middle of the path, its flame glowing with a steady pulse. It was identical to his own. Same iron handle, same cracked glass, same fingerprint smudges. Except this one wasn't flickering in reverse. It burned steady. Alive. Elias approached cautiously, hand on his belt knife. As he drew near, he realized there was something beside the lantern. A bundle, wrapped in the same oilskin as the map he'd found beneath the floorboard. His pulse picked up. He knelt, hesitated, then unwrapped it. Inside was a single page from a journal, its edges torn and corners curled. The handwriting was frantic, much like the scrawl in the original lodge book. But this one was addressed, clearly and unmistakably. Elias, the forest has nested itself inside the lodge. It isn't just outside anymore. Every door, every wall, every stairwell is part of the route. The lodge is growing. I tried to mark the exits, but they kept shifting. It feeds on memory, not just flesh. Soon you won't remember who you were before you came. Don't go to the reflection well. Don't trust anything that calls your name after midnight. And if you see the lantern burning backwards, run. You. Elias stared at the signature. It was his name, his own handwriting. He looked down at the lantern in his hand, the one that had flickered strangely since the Watcher's hollow, the one that had begun dimming as soon as he left the totem. It wasn't just malfunctioning. It was burning backwards. His breath caught. A twig snapped in the trees behind him. Something big. He didn't look. He just ran. The moss seemed to rise and grasp at his ankles as he sprinted, branches clawing down from above, the very path beneath his boots twisting with each stride. The forest wasn't still anymore. It was alive and it was chasing him. The backward burning lantern throbbed in his fist, and shadows leapt unnaturally long beside him. Shapes not his own, limbs too many, too bent. He tripped. His shoulder slammed into the base of a thick black pine, and for a moment he lay stunned, wind knocked clean from his lungs. The forest stilled again. He dared a glance over his shoulder. The trees were moving, not blowing in wind, shifting, reorienting, creating a circle. In front of him, a shape unfolded from the ground. Not a creature, not quite. More like a figure carved from bark and fog and broken wood. Its arms stretched unnaturally, and where its face should have been, there was only a black oval, smooth and endless, like a tunnel with no light at the end. It pointed to his lantern. Elias stood slowly, the message from the journal repeating in his head. If you see the lantern burning backwards, run. But it was too late. He already had. The figure took a step forward. Behind it, others began peeling away from the trees, dozens of them. Each with that same faceless head, that same backwards walking gait, as if time didn't function for them in the same way it did for him. His chest heaved. He turned and bolted again, but the path this time didn't lead to the lodge. It led downward. Sharp turns, winding gullies, strange stairs made of root and stone. The forest had changed its layout again, pulling him where it wanted. He stumbled into a clearing, and there it was. A well, ancient, surrounded by standing stones etched with sigils that shimmered with an oily light. The reflection well. The very place his future self had warned him not to go. And as he stood there, torn between going back and going down, the whisper returned, closer now, almost within him, like breath behind his eardrum. Time is soft here, Elias. You've already come. You've already gone. And then, in the well's dark mouth, a single golden eye opened, wide and wet and knowing. The air around the reflection well was thick, so thick it pressed against Elias's skin like a second, wet layer. The standing stones encircling the well shimmered with an oily light that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, each sigil crawling faintly like living things etched into ancient bark. The well's mouth yawned wide, a black void that seemed to suck in the world around it, warping the edges of reality. The golden eye at its center blinked slowly, holding him in its gaze, cold, unblinking, and ancient beyond understanding. Elias felt every instinct scream at him to turn away, to run back through the twisted forest and never look back. But something stronger held him rooted to the spot. The voice from the shadows whispered again, closer this time, as if it were inside his mind. You cannot hide from what you carry. The well reflects the truth beneath the surface. He knelt by the edge of the well, the lantern's backward burning flame casting eerie shadows against the carved stones. Peering into the blackness, Elias saw not just his own reflection, but flickers of other faces, twisted, distorted, sometimes crying out in silence. Ghosts of those who had fallen to the lodge's curse. His hand trembled as he reached into the cold air above the well, fingers brushing the dark water below. It felt like liquid shadow, thick and alive, and when he touched it, ripples spread outwards, but the ripples moved in reverse, drawing the surface back into itself as if time itself flowed inward here. Suddenly, a sharp pain seared through his wrist. The thorny mark flared, veins of red spreading like wildfire beneath his skin. His breath caught, and the well's surface rippled violently, warping the faces within until a single figure emerged, his own reflection, but twisted. The reflection smiled a cruel, knowing smile, lips curling impossibly wide. Welcome back, Elias, the reflection whispered. You never left. The voice chilled him to the bone. He tried to pull his hand back, but the water's surface clung to him, tugging at his skin with icy fingers. A sudden, furious wind whipped through the clearing, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. The forest groaned as if waking from a long sleep, branches bending and cracking like bones. From the shadows, the faceless figures emerged again, tall, silent, and unblinking. They circled the well, their movements slow and deliberate. The one with dozens of eyes stepped forward, its gaze boring into Elias's soul. "Time fractures here," it said, voice like rustling leaves. "You stand on the edge. Step inside and see what lies beneath your skin. Or step back and be forgotten." Elias's mind raced. He thought of the journal's warnings, the blood seals, the doors that needed closing. But now, faced with the well's terrible invitation, he realized the truth was more complicated. The lodge wasn't just a prison, it was a mirror, a gateway, a trap. And he was both the key and the lock. With a shaking hand, Elias withdrew the small knife and sliced across his palm, letting blood drip into the well. The water glowed briefly, the ripples slowing to a stop. The golden eye blinked once more and then disappeared beneath the surface. The faceless figures stepped back, fading like mist into the forest. Elias pulled his hand free, heart pounding, and stood slowly. He looked back toward the lodge, now barely visible through the thickening fog. The forest seemed quieter, waiting. He knew the first of many seals had been broken. But the battle to close the doors had only just begun. As he turned to leave, the backward burning lantern flared bright for a moment, casting long shadows that stretched not just across the forest floor but into places no light should reach. And somewhere deep within the lodge, a door creaked open. The thick fog clung to Elias like a shroud as he retraced his steps through the forest, the backward burning lantern flickering faintly in his grasp. The eerie silence that had fallen over the woods felt suffocating, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to make a wrong move. Elias's heart thudded in his chest with every cautious footstep, but the dread that gnawed at him was more than just fear of the unknown. It was the growing certainty that the forest had become a living trap, an endless maze of shadows and whispers from which escape was no longer guaranteed. When he finally glimpsed the silhouette of the Black Pines Lodge through the mist, relief should have flooded him, but instead a cold knot tightened in his stomach. The lodge looked different, less like the weathered, forgotten cabin he had first arrived at, and more like an ancient beast slowly stirring from a deep slumber. The windows were dark, yet from within, soft pulses of amber light flickered like the heartbeat of a creature waking. The air buzzed faintly with a tension he could almost taste. As he reached the porch steps, the wooden boards groaned beneath his boots, a familiar sound but now weighted with something sinister. The front door, which he had locked tightly before leaving, hung slightly ajar. A sliver of inky darkness spilled out, swallowing the warm glow of the lamps inside. Elias's fingers tightened around the lantern handle, and with a slow breath, he stepped inside. The lobby was transformed. Dust motes danced lazily in the flickering firelight, but the air smelled of damp earth and rot, not with smoke. The grand staircase was lined with thick cobwebs, yet the ornate railing gleamed with an oily sheen, as if freshly polished by unseen hands. The walls whispered faint murmurs, almost like conversations caught in the spaces between breaths. Elias's eyes were drawn to the hallway on the west wing, the corridor that had led him to the cellar vault before. That hallway was darker than the rest, shadows pooling and shifting, swallowing the flickering light like hungry mouths. But this time he noticed a new door at the end, one he had never seen before. Its surface was carved deep with twisting vines and thorns, intertwining around a symbol resembling an eye, closed, but with lashes etched so finely it almost seemed to blink when caught in the firelight. He approached the door, his pulse hammering. The air grew thick and cold, the hairs on the back of his neck rising as a low hum filled the space, a vibrating frequency that seemed to come from the wood itself. His hand reached out, trembling, and grasped the cold iron handle. The moment he touched it, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Elias swallowed hard. The journal's cryptic warnings echoed in his mind. The seventh gate lies beneath the roots. Only the marked may descend. But beware, for what sleeps below is neither friend nor foe. It is the beginning and the end. With lantern raised, Elias stepped onto the staircase. The walls closed in tightly, carved with ancient runes that pulsed faintly, casting shifting shadows like living tattoos. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decay, and somewhere far below, a faint sound echoed, like slow dripping water or distant sobbing. The stairs seemed endless. Step after step, the chill deepened, the darkness pressing closer. Yet, as he descended, Elias felt a strange pull, like a thread tugging at the core of his being. Memories surfaced, fragmented and distorted. Childhood laughter beneath towering pines, the face of a woman he thought forgotten, a voice calling his name from the dark. At last, the staircase opened into a vast cavern beneath the lodge. The ceiling arched high above, tangled with roots thick as tree trunks, dripping with dark sap that gleamed like black blood. In the center of the cavern was a massive stone altar, covered in carvings of twisted branches and watchful eyes, and at its base lay a pool of ink-black water, deep and still, reflecting the flickering lantern light like a dark mirror. Elias stepped closer, heart pounding. As he peered into the pool, the surface rippled, and his own reflection stared back, but it was wrong. The eyes were sunken and red-rimmed, the mouth twisted into a scream frozen in time. The reflection's lips moved, whispering words he couldn't hear, lips parting and closing with desperate urgency. Suddenly the air around him thickened. Roots writhed beneath the stone floor, cracking the earth as they crept closer. Elias's lantern flickered violently, threatening to go out. A voice echoed from the shadows, low and ancient. "You have come far, Elias. But the roots have memories. They hunger for the story yet untold." The cavern walls seemed to pulse, alive with a slow rhythm. The pool's water began to churn, sending ripples across the reflection. And from its depths, something began to rise, a shape coalescing from shadow and sap, twisting branches and mist. It took the form of a woman, tall and ethereal, her hair a tangle of vines, eyes glowing softly with a spectral green light. She stepped forward, her voice a melody of sorrow and warning. "You bear the mark, child of the forest and flame. The lodge remembers your bloodline. But do you remember yourself?" Elias felt a sudden, crushing weight in his chest, a memory buried deep, beyond words. The line between past and present blurred as the cavern spun slowly around him, shadows whispering secrets older than time. The woman reached out her hand. "To seal the doors, you must first find the truth buried beneath your skin. Only then will the roots release their hold." Elias hesitated, then took her hand. The cavern dissolved into darkness. Darkness swallowed Elias whole, but it was not empty. The moment he took the ethereal woman's hand, a torrent of memories flooded him. A storm of images and sensations that twisted and writhed beneath his skin, impossible to disentangle. It was as if the roots of the forest were not just in the earth, but embedded in his very flesh and blood, tangled in his history and soul. He found himself standing in a place both familiar and strange. A sun-dappled glade where ancient trees towered high above, their branches whispering in a language he once understood but had long forgotten. The air smelled of pine and honey, the ground soft beneath his feet with fallen leaves. Around him danced figures cloaked in mist, children's laughter drifting in the breeze, voices singing songs from a time before the lodge was built, before the forest grew dark. One figure stepped forward, a woman with hair like braided silver, eyes deep pools of forest green, and a smile that held both warmth and sorrow. Her voice was soft but commanding. "You have been chosen, Elias. Born with the blood of the first watcher, the forest's guardian and its prisoner. Your ancestors made the pact to bind the darkness beneath the lodge, but the price was a piece of their memory, forgotten by time, lost to shadow." Elias tried to speak, but his voice was lost in the wind. Instead, the woman reached out and touched his forehead. Suddenly, scenes flashed before his eyes, visions of his ancestors gathering beneath these very pines, chanting words of power and sacrifice, carving sigils into stone and wood, and driving something terrible beneath the earth with blood and fire. Then came a shift. The forest darkened, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes, branches like claws reaching for the sky. The sky itself seemed to bleed, red and black swirling together. A great shadow rose from the earth, a creature with eyes like coals and a maw full of shattered roots, devouring light and hope. "The darkness beneath stirs," the woman whispered, "and the seals weaken. It feeds on forgotten memories and broken promises. Only you can mend what was sundered." The visions faded, and Elias found himself back in the cavern beneath the lodge, still holding the woman's translucent hand. Her gaze bore into his soul. "Your mark is both curse and key. To save the lodge, and yourself, you must confront what you have buried deep within. Seek the crownless altar where the forest's heart beats strongest. There the final truth waits." Elias's chest tightened. He realized the journey ahead was not just through the forest but through himself, a labyrinth of memory, fear, and hope tangled in the roots of his bloodline. The woman smiled, a flicker of light in the shadows. "Remember, Elias, the forest forgets nothing. Neither should you." Her hand slipped from his, and the cavern dissolved into a swirling mist. Elias's feet touched cold stone once more, the altar steps leading upward back toward the lodge. The backward burning lantern flared bright in his grip as he began the ascent, the shadows whispering secrets in a language only his heart could understand. Outside, the forest waited, silent and watchful, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Elias emerged from the subterranean cavern with the first pale light of dawn filtering weakly through the dense canopy above. The lodge behind him seemed unchanged, quiet and still, as if the horrors beneath its floor were meant to remain unseen, untouched by daylight. Yet Elias knew the truth. The lodge was no longer a refuge but a gateway, a threshold between worlds that only he could navigate. The forest had marked him, branded him with a secret older than memory itself, and the final task awaited, the crownless altar where the forest's heart pulsed strongest. He pulled his coat tighter around him, the leather worn but sturdy, and set off down a barely visible trail that wound through the thick tangle of pines. The path was narrow, littered with blackened needles and twisted roots that seemed to writhe beneath his feet as if alive. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures moving just beyond sight. Every step seemed to echo with a faint hum, a vibration that rose from the ground and settled in his bones. Hours passed in this uneasy rhythm, the sky darkening as clouds gathered overhead, heavy with rain yet to fall. The forest seemed to pulse in tandem with Elias's heartbeat, the whispers of leaves and shadows weaving around him like a living thing. The further he traveled, the more the trees shifted, no longer straight and tall, but bent inward, their limbs curling to form archways and cages of wood and vine. Eventually, the trail opened into a vast clearing, encircled by ancient trees whose gnarled branches interlocked overhead, blotting out the sky. In the center stood a massive stone altar, worn smooth by time and covered with intricate carvings, roots, eyes, thorns, and faces frozen in silent screams. The altar was crowned not by a statue or figure but by a hollow space shaped like a crown, empty yet somehow brimming with power, as if the very essence of the forest had been stripped away and left to bleed into the earth. Elias approached cautiously, the air thick with the scent of moss, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. He felt a low vibration beneath his feet, the ground humming with energy. The backward burning lantern flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the carvings like restless spirits. As he laid a hand on the cold stone, a voice, ancient and deep, filled the clearing. "You come bearing the blood of the Watchers, the burden of forgotten promises. To seal the final door, you must offer what the forest demands, the truth of your own heart." Elias's breath caught. The voice was not outside him but inside, echoing in his mind, weaving through his memories and fears. He closed his eyes and saw images flicker, childhood moments lost, whispered secrets from a mother long gone, the face of a father whose eyes held more sorrow than love. He saw his own reflection, fractured and blurred, the crownless space where his identity should have been. A sudden understanding dawned. This altar was not just a place but a test. To mend the forest's broken seal, Elias had to face himself, to confront the guilt, loss, and pain buried beneath his own roots. He knelt before the altar, took the journal from his satchel, and opened it to the blank page he had discovered days before. With trembling fingers he began to write, not the map, not the warnings, but his own story, the memories he had hidden, the regrets he carried, the truths he had denied. The words poured out like blood, raw and unfiltered. The altar seemed to drink them in, the carvings glowing faintly, the empty crown pulsing with light. As he finished, the ground beneath him trembled softly, and the forest exhaled, a breath that rippled through the clearing like a wave. The backward burning lantern flared once more, then steadied, burning true and bright for the first time since he arrived. Elias rose slowly, feeling a weight lift from his chest. The forest around him was still, but it no longer felt hostile. The broken seal beneath the lodge had been mended, but the journey was not over. 6 doors remained, each a guardian of shadows and secrets, and each tied to a piece of the past he had yet to reclaim. As the first drops of rain began to fall, mingling with the damp earth, Elias turned back toward the lodge, determined to face the next door. The black pines waited, patient and eternal. The rain came down in thick sheets, drumming against the thick canopy and washing the forest floor with cold, relentless rhythm. Elias felt the sting of each drop as he pressed onward, the leather of his coat soaked through, his boots sinking into the soft mud of the winding trail. The forest had shifted again since the crownless altar. The path behind him had vanished, swallowed by brambles and thorny vines that seemed to writhe like serpents under the storm. Ahead, a narrow corridor of twisted trees beckoned, their branches bending inward to form a tunnel woven of wood and shadow. The journal had named this place the Backward Path. It was said to be a journey not just through the forest but through time itself, a corridor where cause and effect twisted, and every step forward felt like a step into a past that was not quite history. Elias's mind swirled with the warnings etched into the pages. Here, the forest remembers what you wish to forget, and forgets what you seek to hold. Walk carefully, for the path may take you where you do not wish to go. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and moss, mingled with something faintly metallic like rust or old blood. The rain softened, a whispering drizzle that blurred the shapes of the trees and softened the forest into muted shadows. The backward burning lantern in Elias's hand flickered uncertainly, its flame wavering as if unsure whether to burn at all. With each step, the path grew narrower and the trees closer. The twisted branches above wove a thick latticework that blocked the sky entirely, plunging the world into dim twilight. Strange sounds echoed around him. The creak of wood, faint voices murmuring in a language that danced just beyond comprehension, and the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps not his own. Then, as if the forest itself exhaled, the path opened into a clearing bathed in silvery mist. There stood an ancient oak, its trunk wide and gnarled, roots sprawling like fingers clutching the earth. Hanging from its branches were dozens of small wooden carvings, faces frozen in anguish, painted with hollow eyes and twisted mouths. The air pulsed with a low hum that resonated deep within Elias's chest. He approached the oak, feeling the weight of countless unseen eyes watching him. The rain had ceased completely, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down like a physical force. A sudden movement caught his eye. From the shadows stepped a figure cloaked in a tattered gray robe, face obscured beneath a hood. The figure's voice was a rasping whisper, dry as dead leaves. You walk the backward path, seeker. Here, memories unravel and weave anew. What you carry may not be yours. What you lose may be your salvation. Elias's heart raced. The figure raised a hand, revealing a carved wooden talisman shaped like a twisted tree root. Take this, the figure said, pressing the talisman into Elias's palm. It is a fragment of the path, a key to unlock the door ahead. But beware, the past is not fixed. It will test your resolve, your truth, and your very soul. Elias clutched the talisman, feeling its cold weight against his skin. Suddenly the clearing seemed to shift. The mist thickened and spun around him, blurring the edges of reality. The faces on the carvings seemed to whisper, their hollow eyes pleading. The forest whispered a warning he could not ignore: trust no shadow. Follow no name but your own. Elias turned, feeling the backward burning lantern flicker fiercely, as the path behind him dissolved into swirling mist. There was no going back. The only way forward was deeper into the forest's twisted memory. The mist clung to Elias like a living thing, wrapping its cold fingers around his coat and seeping into his bones as he stepped forward along the backward path. The wooden talisman pressed heavily in his palm, its twisted root carving rough beneath his skin, a small anchor in the shifting haze. The lantern's flame, still flickering strangely backward, cast dim, wavering light that barely pierced the thickening fog. Around him, the forest seemed to breathe, a slow, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that reverberated through the trunks and branches. The shadows moved with a will of their own, slipping in and out of sight, whispering secrets just beyond the edge of hearing. The faces carved into the oak from the clearing lingered in his mind, their hollow eyes accusing and pleading, as if bound to this place by ancient sorrow. Elias's footsteps were muffled, swallowed by the mist, but the echoes that followed were not his own. Somewhere, behind and ahead, other footsteps pressed through the fog, light and heavy in unnatural cadence. He slowed, straining to listen, but the sounds seemed to ripple and twist, growing louder and softer in impossible rhythms. As he pushed forward, the forest began to shift around him. Trees bent and stretched, their branches twisting like serpents, forming arches and doorways that vanished when he looked too closely. The path fragmented, dividing into endless forks that led nowhere, or back to where he had started. The mist thickened, obscuring everything beyond a few feet, turning the world into a swirling gray labyrinth. Then out of the fog a voice called his name. Soft at first, a breath on the wind, then louder, more urgent. Elias. He stopped dead. The voice was familiar, too familiar, and yet impossible. It was a woman's voice, tender and sorrowful. His heart clenched as memory surged unbidden. A laugh, a touch, a promise whispered long ago beneath the pines. He called out, but the fog swallowed his words. Don't follow, a second voice whispered, this one darker, edged with warning. She is not who you remember. Elias hesitated, torn between the ache of longing and the cold certainty of danger. The backward-burning lantern flickered wildly, casting jagged shadows that danced across the mist like restless spirits. He gripped the wooden talisman tighter, its rough edges biting into his palm. The path split again. One fork led toward the fading sound of the woman's voice, the other into deeper silence, where the trees loomed like silent sentinels. Taking a deep breath, Elias chose the silent path. The mist thickened, pressing in around him, and the temperature dropped sharply. He could hear the faint drip of water somewhere nearby, the rustle of leaves, and beneath it all, a low hum vibrating through the earth. The backward-burning lantern's flame dimmed to a faint glow, then steadied, casting a pale light that illuminated shapes moving just beyond reach. As he moved forward, ghostly figures appeared in the mist, shapes of men, women, and children, faces blurred and eyes hollow. They reached out, whispering lost names, pleading for remembrance. Elias felt their sorrow and fear like a cold weight on his chest. One figure stepped closer, a young boy with pale eyes and tangled hair, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Elias reached out, but the boy vanished, leaving only a chill and a whisper. "Remember who you are," the voice echoed. Elias's mind raced. The forest was testing him, weaving illusions from his memories and fears. He had to hold fast to keep the truth clear in his heart, or risk being lost forever in the backward path's endless maze. Suddenly, the mist parted ahead, revealing a crumbling stone archway entwined with thorny vines. Beyond it lay a narrow bridge stretching over a black void, the threshold to the next door, the maw of the oak. Elias stepped onto the bridge, the wood creaking beneath his feet. The mist curled around him, voices fading into silence, leaving only the steady pulse of his own heartbeat and the backward-burning flame lighting his way. He knew the path ahead would demand more than courage, it would demand the deepest parts of his soul. And he was ready. The ancient bridge stretched before Elias like a fragile thread woven between two worlds. Its planks were worn and slick with moss, creaking softly under his cautious footsteps as he crossed the yawning black void below. A void so deep that even the faint glow of his backward-burning lantern could not penetrate its inky depths. The air here was thick and heavy, weighted with the scent of damp wood and forgotten sorrow, and the silence was absolute, as if the world held its breath in dread. At the far end of the bridge, an enormous oak tree loomed, its trunk twisted and gnarled, bark cracked like ancient parchment. This was the maw of the oak, a living doorway whispered about in the journal's cryptic entries. Its hollow heart was said to guard one of the remaining seals, one more door that must be closed if the forest's creeping darkness was ever to be held at bay. Elias approached, the lantern's flames sputtering against the thickening gloom. The tree's hollow mouth yawned wide, black and cavernous, and inside, faint glimmers of movement flickered like trapped fireflies. From within the shadowed depths came a low, rumbling growl, a sound that vibrated through the very ground beneath his feet. The tree seemed alive, breathing, watching, waiting. He hesitated, heart pounding, then stepped closer. As his hand reached toward the rough bark, the ground trembled softly. Roots shifted beneath the earth like serpents stirring in their lair, curling and twisting toward him as if to warn or warn away. Suddenly, from the darkness inside the maw, two glowing eyes snapped open, wide and hungry, golden and fierce. They fixed on Elias with an intelligence that chilled him deeper than the cold night air. The growl rose to a roar, echoing through the forest like a primal thunderclap. Elias gripped the wooden talisman tightly, whispering the words he had memorized from the journal, words that promised binding and protection, the ancient pact between man and forest. The tree trembled, its bark cracking, and the hollow mouth began to close slowly, roots weaving together like jagged teeth forming a cage. Yet the eyes remained fixed on him, unblinking, full of endless hunger. From behind him, the whispers returned, the voices of the lost, the forgotten, calling out through the trees, urging him to flee, to give up. But Elias stood firm. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small vial of blood, his own, offered it to the maw, the liquid glinting crimson in the dim lantern light. The tree's roar faltered, the roots hesitated, then slowly receded, revealing a narrow passage that led inside. Elias stepped forward, the darkness swallowing him whole. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the walls pulsed with life, breathing, shifting, alive with root and vein. The path twisted deeper into the heart of the tree, winding through chambers carved from wood and stone, lit by glowing fungi that cast eerie, bioluminescent light. At the end of the passage, Elias found an altar, smaller than the one in the clearing but no less ancient. It was covered with symbols matching those in the journal, the final lines of a long-forgotten language. On the altar lay a twisted root, crowned with dark flowers that seemed to wither and bloom in impossible cycles. Elias placed the vial of blood on the altar, whispering the binding words once more. The root writhed, the flowers pulsed, and the air filled with a soft hum, rising to a crescendo before falling silent. The maw had been sealed. As he turned to leave, the glowing eyes appeared again, no longer fierce but watchful, almost mournful. The tree's breath slowed, the roots relaxed, and Elias felt a fragile peace settle over the forest. But there were still doors to close. 6 remained, each more treacherous than the last. Steeling himself, Elias prepared to continue, knowing the forest was watching, waiting, and that the shadows were far from defeated. The forest seemed to exhale as Elias stepped back from the maw of the oak, the ancient seal settling quietly beneath the earth with a final shudder. Rain had returned, soft and cold, tapping steadily against the canopy and mingling with the faint scent of moss and sap. But the calm was deceptive. Elias knew better than to trust it. The black pines were patient but relentless, and 6 more doors, 6 more seals, stood between him and the fragile safety of escape. Clutching the wooden talisman tightly, Elias set off once more, the path ahead barely visible beneath layers of wet leaves and creeping roots. The journal's pages had mentioned the corridor of broken echoes next, a narrow stretch of forest where voices from the past and future tangled and collided, twisting perception until reality was a fragile, shifting thing. As he walked, the air grew dense with whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that threaded through the trees and curled around his mind like tendrils. At first, the voices were distant, like echoes carried on the wind. Then they sharpened, forming fragmented phrases, familiar names, half-forgotten promises, and sharp warnings. Elias's breath caught as a voice whispered his own name, a voice filled with both longing and dread. He spun, lantern raised, but found nothing but thick trunks and drifting mist. The ground beneath him trembled softly, as if the forest itself was alive with memories. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, faces, fleeting and blurred, appearing in the bark of trees or the twisting shapes of roots. Some seemed to call out to him, others warned him to turn back. The corridor stretched on endlessly, narrowing until the trees pressed in close, their branches forming a vaulted ceiling above that blocked out all light but the dim glow of his lantern. Elias's footsteps echoed hollowly in the stillness, and with every step, the voices grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, a figure appeared ahead, tall and slender, cloaked in tattered robes that seemed woven from shadows. The face was obscured, but Elias felt the unmistakable weight of recognition, a presence tied to the deepest parts of the forest's secrets. The figure spoke, voice soft and laced with sorrow. The echoes are fragments of what was and what might be. They are the memories the forest cannot forget, and the futures it fears to see. To pass you must listen but not be lost. Elias nodded, the lantern flickering in his grasp. He stepped forward cautiously, focusing on the whispers, trying to piece together meaning from the fractured voices. One whispered a childhood memory of warmth and laughter. Another spoke of betrayal, sharp and bitter. A third warned of a coming shadow, darker than any before. The voices overlapped, weaving a tapestry of pain, hope, and fear that tugged at his very soul. He realized then that the corridor was not merely a passage, it was a trial. To continue, he had to confront the echoes within himself, to separate truth from illusion, and hold on to the fragile thread of his own identity. The figure raised a hand, and the voices coalesced into a single clear note, a haunting melody that stirred something deep in Elias's heart. As the song filled the corridor, the shadows retreated, and the path ahead brightened with a soft, golden light. Elias pressed onward, the voices fading but their lessons etched into his soul. The corridor of broken echoes had tested him, and he had not faltered. Ahead, through the parting mist, he glimpsed the next gate, an iron door entwined with thorns and flickering faintly with ghostly blue flame. The door to the next seal awaited. Elias approached the iron door with caution, the soft glow of ghostly blue flames licking its twisted surface, casting long, trembling shadows that writhed like living things across the damp forest floor. The door was old, ancient even, its ironwork intertwined with thorny vines that pulsed faintly as if breathing, their sharp tips glinting like cold teeth ready to tear. The air around it buzzed faintly with an uneasy energy, a tension born of centuries of forgotten sorrow and desperate hope. As Elias reached out to touch the cold iron, a chill ran down his spine. The backward burning lantern in his hand flickered uncertainly, its strange flame casting eerie light that danced across the thorns, making them seem to twist and curl in slow, deliberate movements. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, and faint whispers drifted on the wind, fragments of voices lost to time. He knew from the journal that this was the forgotten door, a threshold not just to another part of the lodge's prison but to memories erased and truths buried deep beneath layers of pain and regret. To open it would mean facing what had been denied, confronting shadows long hidden. Elias took a deep breath, steadying himself, and pressed the talisman against the ironwork. The thorns shivered, then slowly began to retract, curling back like the petals of a dangerous flower. The blue flames surged brighter, revealing a keyhole carved with ancient runes. He searched his satchel and found a small, twisted key he discovered earlier, its shape echoing the thorny vines. The key fit perfectly, and with a soft click, the door creaked open, releasing a breath of cold, stale air that smelled of forgotten memories. Stepping through, Elias found himself in a long, narrow corridor lined with faded portraits, their subjects' faces blurred and indistinct. The walls themselves seemed to pulse softly, like the heartbeat of a buried secret. As he walked, the portraits began to change, images sharpening and twisting until the faces became unmistakably familiar. Friends and family, strangers and foes, all caught in expressions of sorrow, fear, or betrayal. Whispers rose around him, voices pleading to be heard. "Remember us," one voice urged, trembling with regret. "Remember what you forgot." Elias's heart ached as memories surged, lost moments, forgotten promises, and painful truths he had buried deep. The corridor twisted and turned, each step a descent into his own past, the past of the lodge and the intertwined fates that had bound them all. At the corridor's end, a shattered mirror stood propped against the wall, its surface cracked and clouded but still reflecting his image. As Elias looked closer, the reflection blurred and changed, showing scenes he had never lived but somehow knew. The lodge burning in a forgotten time, faces twisted in fear, and a dark figure lurking just beyond the flames. The voice whispered again, close enough to chill his skin. "The past is never truly gone, Elias. To move forward, you must accept it, not fight it." With a steadying breath, Elias reached out and touched the mirror. The cracked surface rippled like water, pulling him in. He felt himself falling, tumbling through layers of shadow and light until he landed hard on cold stone. Before him lay a forgotten room deep beneath the lodge, walls lined with journals, letters, and keepsakes, remnants of lives once intertwined with the forest and its curse. Elias understood then. The forgotten door was a gateway to acceptance, a passage through the pain and denial that held the lodge's power in place. He would have to face these shadows, one by one, if he was ever to free the lodge, and himself. The cold stone floor bit through Elias's worn boots as he rose from the fall, the weight of silence pressing down on him like a shroud. The chamber beneath the lodge was vast, its walls lined with rows of weathered journals, brittle letters, and faded photographs, each one a fragment of stories left untold and memories abandoned to time. The air hung heavy with dust and the faint, bittersweet scent of dried flowers, as if the room itself mourned the lives it held captive. Elias stepped forward, lantern flickering softly, illuminating the faded script on the cracked leather bindings of the journals. His fingers brushed over the spines, and with each touch, a ripple of emotion surged through him. Grief, regret, hope, and despair, tangled like the roots of the forest above. The voices from the corridor echoed faintly, a chorus of forgotten souls pleading for remembrance. He opened the first journal carefully. The handwriting was elegant but trembling, words filled with longing and fear. A woman's account of a love lost to the darkness that crept beneath the lodge, a promise made to protect the forest and its secrets at any cost. The pages were stained with tears, and the margins filled with hastily scrawled warnings and prayers. Turning to the next, Elias found the letters, correspondence between friends torn apart by suspicion and silence, their words a fragile thread weaving through years of mistrust and heartbreak. The photographs were faded but haunting, faces caught mid-laugh, frozen moments before tragedy, eyes that seemed to follow him, desperate to be seen and understood. As Elias moved deeper into the chamber, the walls seemed to pulse, shadows lengthening and twisting with a life of their own. The voices grew louder, more insistent, no longer whispers but urgent cries weaving through the air. They told stories of betrayal and sacrifice, of promises broken and truths buried beneath layers of fear. Suddenly, the flickering lantern cast a long shadow across the floor, and from the darkness, a figure emerged. A man, translucent and trembling, eyes full of sorrow. He spoke without words, but Elias understood. This was one of the lost, bound to the lodge by chains of forgotten memories. The man reached out, and Elias felt a coldness seep into his bones as their hands almost touched. Images flooded his mind, visions of a pact made long ago, a sacrifice to bind the darkness beneath the lodge, and a curse passed down through generations. Elias realized then that the lodge was not just a place but a prison, one built from the memories and sacrifices of those who came before. To free it, he had to unravel the past, accept the pain, and carry their burdens alongside his own. With a deep breath, Elias closed the journal and looked around the chamber. The shadows recoiled, the voices softened, and the air lightened as if the weight of forgotten sorrow had been acknowledged, if not yet lifted. The path ahead was still dark and fraught with peril, but Elias felt a spark of resolve. He had begun to understand the true nature of the lodge's curse and the depth of the sacrifice required. As he prepared to move on, the backward burning lantern flared bright, casting long shadows that stretched toward the chamber's heavy oak door. The next threshold, the door to the silent watcher. Elias stepped forward, ready to face what lay beyond. The heavy oak door loomed before Elias like a sentinel guarding the threshold between the forgotten past and an uncertain future. Its surface was carved deep with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift beneath the flickering light of his backward burning lantern. Each mark told a story, ancient pacts, silent vows, and a watchfulness older than the lodge itself. Elias could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes fixed upon him, waiting for him to prove his worth, or falter. With a deep breath, he pressed his hand against the rough wood. The surface felt alive, pulsing faintly beneath his palm, as though the door itself breathed with the pulse of the forest. A chill spread from the touch, running up his arm and settling in his chest. The backward burning lantern's flame flickered wildly, casting jagged shadows that stretched and twisted like restless spirits. The door creaked open, revealing a vast chamber shrouded in darkness. The air was heavy, thick with silence that seemed almost unnatural, as if sound itself had been swallowed whole. Elias stepped inside, each footfall echoing softly against cold stone. The faint glow from his lantern illuminated towering pillars carved from ancient wood, their surfaces etched with watchful eyes that glimmered faintly, like stars caught in bark. As he moved deeper, the silence pressed down on him, heavy and oppressive. Then, a subtle shift, the softest of movements in the corner of his vision. He turned sharply, but there was nothing but shadows and silence. The air trembled with anticipation. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. A tall, cloaked entity, face obscured beneath a hood, eyes gleaming faintly like moonlit pools. The silent watcher. The figure did not speak but extended a pale hand, fingers long and delicate, inviting Elias forward. In its palm rested a small, carved eye made of polished obsidian, reflecting the lantern's strange flame. Elias hesitated, then reached out and took the eye. The moment his fingers closed around it, a surge of visions flooded his mind, images of the lodge through centuries, fires igniting and dying, faces coming and going, secrets whispered and buried beneath the roots. He saw the watchers, silent guardians bound to protect and observe, neither fully living nor dead, trapped in an endless vigil. The silent watcher's presence pressed on Elias, demanding understanding and acceptance. The forest had chosen him not just to close doors, but to bear witness, to remember, and to guard the fragile line between light and shadow. As the visions faded, Elias found himself alone in the chamber, the obsidian eye warm in his palm. The backward burning lantern steadied, its flame burning steady and true for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He knew then that the Watcher's gift was both a blessing and a burden, a key to seeing beyond illusion, but also a chain tying him to the forest's eternal vigil. With renewed purpose, Elias stepped toward the next door, a heavy iron gate entwined with creeping ivy and glowing faintly with spectral light. 6 doors remained, and the lodge's secrets were only just beginning to unfold. The iron gate loomed ahead, draped in twisting ivy that pulsed with an otherworldly light, its tendrils curling like serpents alive and whispering secrets in a language older than the forest itself. The air was thick and heavy with a strange energy, a mixture of damp earth, ancient wood, and something darker, something waiting patiently beneath the surface. Elias approached slowly, the backward burning lantern flickering gently, casting shadows that danced and twisted around the creeping vines. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold iron, and the ivy recoiled as if disturbed by a sudden breath. The gate's surface was etched with delicate patterns, interlocking leaves, thorny branches, and faint images of faces, some peaceful, others twisted in silent screams. It felt alive, aware of his presence, testing his resolve. The journal had warned him about this gate, the gate of ivy and shadows, calling it a threshold not just to a place but to a test of trust and fear, where light and dark intertwined in dangerous balance. To pass, Elias would need to confront the shadows within himself, to face what he feared most and to embrace the parts of his soul he had long denied. The backward burning lantern's flame surged, casting a warm glow that pushed back the creeping shadows. Taking a deep breath, Elias pressed the obsidian eye, gifted by the silent watcher, against the ironwork. The gate shuddered, and the ivy's glow intensified, weaving patterns of light and shadow that pulsed in harmony with his heartbeat. Slowly, the gate creaked open, revealing a narrow passage swallowed by darkness. Elias stepped through, the whispers of the ivy echoing softly in his ears, words of warning, of hope, of lost paths waiting to be found. Inside, the air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of earth and growing things. The passage wound deep beneath the forest, its walls alive with shifting shadows that flickered like flames in a cold fire. Shapes moved just beyond the lantern's reach, phantoms of doubt, fear, and regret, testing his courage with silent accusations. Elias pressed onward, the obsidian eye warm in his pocket, a steady beacon against the darkness. Memories surfaced unbidden, moments of failure, fear of loss, the sting of loneliness. The shadows coalesced into shapes from his past, faces he had loved and lost, mistakes he had tried to forget. He stumbled but did not fall, steadying himself with the knowledge that the shadows were part of him, not enemies to be vanquished but truths to be embraced. As the passage opened into a vast cavern, Elias found himself surrounded by glowing ivy, its light pulsing in sync with the heartbeat of the forest itself. At the cavern's center stood a pedestal, cradling a single delicate blossom, a flower of translucent petals that shimmered with an inner light. Reaching out, Elias touched the blossom, feeling a surge of warmth and peace wash over him. The shadows retreated, and the cavern filled with a radiant glow that seemed to cleanse the darkness from his soul. The gate of ivy and shadows had been crossed, but the forest trials were not yet complete. 5 doors remained, each guarding deeper secrets and darker truths. Elias steadied himself, knowing the path ahead would demand more than courage, it would demand all of his heart. Elias emerged from the cavern bathed in the gentle light of the blossoming flower, the glow fading as he stepped back into the shadowed forest. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a thick carpet of damp leaves and the earthy scent of renewal. Above, the twisted canopy of black pines stretched toward a slate-gray sky, heavy with the promise of more storms. The air was cool and crisp, but beneath the surface, a subtle tension hummed, an echo of the trials yet to come. Before him lay the next challenge, the hollow beneath the roots, an ancient sinkhole rumored to be the very heart of the forest's buried curse. The journal spoke of it as a place where earth and shadow merged, where the roots of the black pines intertwined with the dark magic that had seeped into the lodge's foundation. To confront it was to face the forest's deepest wound, and the darkness that festered there. Elias made his way through the dense underbrush, the backward burning lantern lighting his path as the forest grew thick with twisting roots and tangled vines. The ground beneath him became uneven, sinking gently as if the earth itself was breathing. The trees here were ancient, massive sentinels with bark rough as stone and limbs like skeletal arms reaching out in silent warning. He found the hollow at last, a vast depression carved deep into the earth, its edges jagged and raw, like a wound in the forest's skin. From its depths came a faint, pulsing glow, dark and blue, like a dying star, casting eerie shadows that danced and flickered across the twisted roots framing the pit. Elias peered over the edge, feeling a cold draft rise from the hollow. The backward burning lantern's flame sputtered, threatening to go out, but Elias held it steady, drawing strength from its strange light. The journal had warned that the hollow was a place of memory and temptation, where the forest's voice whispered promises and lies, luring those who dared to listen into despair or madness. It was a test of will as much as courage. Steeling himself, Elias began the descent, carefully picking his way down tangled roots slick with moss and moisture. The further he went, the heavier the air became, thick with the scent of earth and something faintly metallic, old blood, forgotten tears. At the hollow's floor, he found an altar carved from the roots themselves, a twisted throne crowned with thorny vines and dark flowers. It pulsed with energy, a heartbeat in the dark, and Elias sensed a presence waiting, something ancient and watchful, bound to this place by grief and rage. As he approached, shadows gathered, forming into shapes, ghostly figures with eyes like burning coals, faces twisted in pain and fury. They reached out, voices rising in a chorus of sorrow and anger. "Why do you come?" they demanded, their voices echoing like the wind through dead branches. "What do you seek in the forest's wound?" Elias stood firm, the backward burning lantern glowing steady in his grasp. He spoke of the pact, of the lodge's curse, and of his quest to mend what was broken. The spirits listened, their fiery eyes piercing his soul, searching for truth. Then the leader stepped forward, a figure cloaked in shadow, crowned with roots and thorns. His voice was like the grinding of stone. The forest bleeds because its watchers have failed. To heal the hollow, you must take on its pain, bear its sorrow, and bind yourself to its fate. Elias felt the weight of that burden settle over him, heavy as the forest itself. But he also felt a spark of hope, a chance to end the cycle of fear and loss. With a steady hand, he placed the obsidian eye on the altar. The ground trembled, roots shifting and weaving, wrapping around the talisman as light and shadow entwined in a slow, sacred dance. The hollow pulsed brighter, the dark glow fading into a soft, warm light that spread through the forest like dawn breaking. Elias rose, breath steady, heart pounding. One more door had been sealed, one more piece of the curse undone. The path ahead was still shrouded in shadow, but the forest seemed to breathe easier, its pulse steadier. Only 4 doors remained, and the forest's deepest secrets waited still. Elias climbed from the hollow beneath the roots, his muscles aching from the descent but his spirit strangely lighter. The forest around him seemed to shift, the heavy weight of sorrow easing, replaced by an eerie calm that whispered of change. Above, the black pines swayed gently in a wind that carried the scent of rain and distant storms. The backward burning lantern in his hand burned steadily now, its strange flame a beacon against the deepening dusk. Ahead, the journal marked the next trial, the mirror of fallen stars, a place rumored to exist at the edge of reality itself, where the boundaries between the forest and the sky blurred. It was said to reflect not only the physical world but the soul's hidden depths, dreams, fears, and truths too painful to face. Elias made his way through thick undergrowth, branches snagging at his coat as shadows lengthened. The trees grew taller here, their trunks disappearing into the mist that curled low to the ground like breath from a sleeping beast. The air was cooler, tinged with the faint shimmer of something unearthly. With every step, the whispers grew louder, soft murmurs of forgotten stars and ancient promises. At last, he reached a clearing bathed in silver light. In its center stood a massive, crystalline mirror, framed by twisted branches adorned with glimmering shards like frozen tears. The mirror's surface rippled gently, reflecting a sky filled with countless stars, stars that flickered and fell like delicate sparks, tracing paths through the velvet darkness. Elias approached cautiously, the lantern's flame flickering as if responding to the mirror's strange energy. The reflection shimmered, then shifted, revealing not the forest behind him but scenes from his own memories. Moments of joy and loss, fear and hope, faces he had loved and moments he had buried deep. The mirror seemed alive, breathing with a pulse that matched his own. As he stared, the surface rippled again, revealing darker visions. Failures and regrets, choices made and paths not taken. Shadows moved just beneath the surface, whispering doubts and fears that clawed at his resolve. The voice from the journal echoed in his mind, "To face the mirror of fallen stars is to face yourself. Only by embracing your whole truth can the path forward be revealed." Elias closed his eyes, letting the visions wash over him without resistance. He saw his own reflections, not just the man he wanted to be but the man he truly was, flawed and scarred but resilient. He felt the weight of the past and the fragile hope for the future intertwine, a delicate balance like the dance of stars in the night sky. When he opened his eyes, the mirror's surface calmed, its glow softening to a gentle light that bathed the clearing in warmth. The backward burning lantern's flame steadied, its glow harmonizing with the mirror's light. A path appeared beyond the clearing, lined with shimmering stardust and whispering leaves, leading toward the next door, the gate of silent roots. Elias stepped forward, heart steady and mind clear. The forest's secrets were unraveling, and the lodge's curse was weakening, but much remained hidden in shadow. 4 doors remained, 4 more trials, and the black pines waited, patient as ever. The path beyond the mirror of fallen stars led Elias through a forest transformed. The air was thick with an ancient stillness, the usual whispers and rustlings hushed as if the very earth held its breath. The trees here grew taller, their trunks thick and covered with thick moss, roots sprawling like silent veins beneath the soil. Each step brought a sense of heavy reverence, as if Elias was walking through a sacred cathedral built by nature itself. The gate of silent roots stood at the heart of this quiet grove. Unlike the previous doors, this one was not a gate in the conventional sense but a living barrier, a wall of twisted roots and vines, so dense and interwoven that no light passed through. The roots writhed faintly, as if aware of Elias's presence, and the silence around them was profound, broken only by the occasional drip of moisture from leaf to leaf. Elias approached slowly, the backward burning lantern held before him casting a faint, warm glow that fought against the oppressive darkness of the root wall. As he reached out to touch the living barrier, a cold shiver ran up his spine. The roots pulsed faintly under his fingertips, sending a ripple of energy through his body that felt both warning and invitation. From within the wall, a voice whispered, soft, barely audible but filled with deep sorrow and ancient wisdom. To pass you must listen. The roots remember. The roots see. But they speak only in silence. Elias closed his eyes, focusing on the whispers carried not by sound but by feeling, the vibrations through his skin, the subtle shifts in the air. Memories bloomed in his mind. The forest's birth, the pact that had bound the lodge and the woods, the sacrifices made in silence so long ago. The roots whispered tales of betrayal and loyalty, of pain carried wordlessly through generations. He realized then that this trial demanded not force or courage, but understanding, a communion with the forest's quiet heart. Elias placed the obsidian eye against the roots, feeling the rough bark press into his palm. The roots shuddered, slowly unraveling to form a narrow archway. As Elias stepped through, the silence broke, soft at first, then swelling into a chorus of voices without words. The forest seemed to breathe around him, alive with ancient life and secrets long held in quiet vigil. Ahead, the path wound through an ethereal grove bathed in soft moonlight, leading toward the next door, a gate forged from ice and shadow, shimmering with cold fire. Elias's breath caught. The trials had grown more demanding, the shadows deeper. But with each step, the backward burning lantern's flame burned brighter, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. 3 doors remained, and the forest waited, its secrets still guarded by silence and shadow. Elias stepped through the archway of silent roots, leaving behind the reverent hush of the grove and entering a realm where cold and darkness intertwined like dancers in a macabre waltz. The air chilled instantly, biting into his skin and stealing warmth from his bones. Frost clung to the leaves, glinting like shattered glass beneath a dim, spectral light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The forest here was stark and unfamiliar, yet alive with a different kind of presence, a silent threat wrapped in shimmering ice and shadow. Before him rose the gate of ice and shadow, an immense construct of blackened iron etched with frost patterns that shifted and moved like living tattoos. The gate pulsed with a cold energy, a faint blue flame flickering within the crevices, casting eerie reflections on the frozen ground. The backward burning lantern's flame wavered in response, as if struggling against the biting cold, but Elias held it steady, drawing warmth from its strange light. The journal warned that the gate of ice and shadow was a test of endurance and truth, demanding that the traveler confront the coldest parts of their soul, the doubts, the fears, the hidden lies that fester beneath the surface. To pass, Elias would need to face the chilling reality of his own heart, the shadows he had long avoided. He reached out and pressed the obsidian eye against the icy iron. The gate shuddered, and the frost patterns writhed and cracked, revealing glimpses of flickering shadows within, visions of his past, moments when fear had frozen him in place, choices avoided and truths ignored. Suddenly, the ground beneath Elias's feet froze solid, and the air thickened with icy breath. Shadows emerged from the gate, figures cloaked in frost, their faces veiled and hollow. They circled him silently, their presence pressing cold doubt against his chest. Elias's mind raced, memories flickering like brittle flames. The moments of hesitation, the lies told to himself and others, the weight of solitude and fear. The icy figures reached out with ghostly hands, touching his skin with cold fingers that burned like frostbite. But Elias did not flinch. Instead, he summoned the warmth from the backward burning lantern, focusing on its steady light. He spoke aloud, voice firm and steady, declaring his truths. The fears faced, the lies admitted, the pain accepted. The frost around him cracked and shattered, the icy figures dissolving into shimmering mist. The gate's cold energy faded, replaced by a warm glow that spread across the frozen forest floor, melting the frost and bringing life back to the frozen trees. With a deep breath, Elias pushed open the gate of ice and shadow. Beyond it lay a path lined with ancient stones glowing faintly with runes, leading to the next trial, a door of glass and flame. 2 doors remained. The lodge's secrets were unraveling, but the heart of the forest's curse still pulsed in darkness. Elias stepped forward, lantern flame steady, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Elias crossed the threshold of the gate of ice and shadow into a clearing bathed in an otherworldly glow. The air was thick with warmth and crackling energy, a stark contrast to the frozen silence he had just left behind. Here, the forest seemed alive with fire, not destructive flames, but living, breathing embers that flickered and danced across the ground like fireflies trapped in a dream. At the heart of the clearing stood the door of glass and flame, a towering structure forged from shimmering crystal and molten fire, its surface rippling as if made of liquid light and heat. Flames licked its edges without consuming, casting prismatic colors that shimmered in the shadows. The door pulsed with a fierce energy, radiating both danger and promise. The backward-burning lantern in Elias's hand flared brightly, its unusual flame casting a warm glow that blended with the fiery light of the door. The journal described this door as the trial of transformation, a challenge that demanded he confront not just external dangers, but the fire within himself, passion, rage, love, and the will to change. Elias stepped forward cautiously, the heat brushing against his skin like a living thing. As he reached out to touch the glass, visions exploded behind his eyes. Moments of fierce emotion, anger at injustice, love for those lost, the burning desire to protect, and the fierce determination to survive. The door shimmered, responding to the truth of his heart. Suddenly, the flames around the door surged, swirling into fiery shapes. Creatures forged from smoke and embers, eyes glowing with ancient wisdom and fierce judgment. They circled Elias, their presence both intimidating and oddly comforting, as if they understood the turmoil within him. Elias met their gaze steadily, drawing strength from the backward-burning lantern's steady flame. He spoke aloud, voice firm, acknowledging the fire within him, the anger that burned, the love that fueled him, and the courage to change his fate. The fiery creatures bowed their heads, the flames softening into a gentle warmth. The door's surface rippled once more, then parted like a curtain of molten glass, revealing a path of flickering shadows and glowing embers leading deeper into the lodge's heart. Elias stepped through, feeling the heat of the flames soothe his soul and ignite his resolve. Beyond the door of glass and flame lay the next challenge, a door veiled in mist and shadow, whispering promises and threats alike. Only one door remained after that, the end of his journey, or perhaps the true beginning. Elias tightened his grip on the wooden talisman, the backward-burning lantern's flame steady as ever. The forest waited, its secret still shrouded in darkness and light. Elias emerged from the fiery glow of the door of glass and flame into a world transformed, a place suspended between reality and dream, where swirling mists clung to every surface like ghostly veils. The air was thick with moisture, heavy and cool, carrying whispers that seemed to ripple through the fog, half-heard voices speaking in tongues forgotten by time. Here, the forest felt different, alive with secrets concealed beneath layers of shadow and fog. The path ahead was barely visible, a narrow trail winding into the dense mist that swallowed sound and light alike. The backward-burning lantern's flame flickered uncertainly, its warm glow struggling to pierce the enveloping gray. The journal had warned Elias that the veil of mist and shadow was the final threshold before the heart of the lodge's curse, a place where the line between truth and illusion blurred and where one's deepest fears and desires were laid bare. As he stepped forward, the mist thickened, swirling around him in icy tendrils that seemed almost sentient. Shapes appeared and vanished at the edge of his vision, figures cloaked in shadow, whispering his name, echoing long-forgotten memories and haunting regrets. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if he would falter. Elias pressed onward, each step a battle against creeping doubt and swirling confusion. The whispers grew louder, voices overlapping in a cacophony of sorrow and warning. Faces materialized within the mist, some familiar, others twisted by fear and pain, each one a fragment of the past or a shadow of the future. The backward-burning lantern's flame steadied as Elias focused on the talisman in his hand, the ancient wood warm and reassuring. He whispered the words he had learned through his journey, a chant of protection and clarity that wove through the mist like a thread of light. Slowly, the swirling fog began to part, revealing a vast chamber draped in shadows and shimmering mist. At its center stood the final door, massive and wrought from blackened iron and ancient wood, scarred by time and marked with symbols that pulsed faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. Elias stepped forward, feeling the weight of all he had endured, the trials, the shadows faced, the truths revealed. This door was the last barrier, the final seal holding the lodge's curse in place. As he reached out to touch the door, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, a low, haunting tone that echoed from deep within the forest's soul. Are you ready to face what lies beyond, Elias? To confront the heart of the darkness and bind it forever. Elias's hand closed around the obsidian eye once more, the backward-burning lantern's flame steady and bright. With a determined breath, he nodded. The final door creaked open, the chamber beyond filled with shadows that shifted and danced, whispering the last of the lodge's secrets. The journey's end was near. But the heart of darkness awaited. Stepping through the heavy iron door, Elias was swallowed by a chamber vast beyond comprehension. The air was thick, suffused with a darkness that seemed to have weight, pressing in from every corner like the forest itself had folded inward to trap him. Shadows writhed along the stone walls, coalescing and shifting with a life of their own, their whispers now sharp and insistent. This was the heart of the lodge's curse, the source of its restless power, the place where pain, fear, and ancient magic intertwined. The backward burning lantern cast its strange glow, a fragile light in the oppressive gloom. Every breath Elias took echoed like a shout, and the silence between was heavy with anticipation. The chamber was circular, its ceiling lost to shadow, and at its center stood a massive blackened tree, its gnarled roots twisting like serpents, its bark scarred and bleeding a faint crimson light. The tree pulsed with a terrible life force, and Elias could feel it resonating with the talisman in his hand. It was the source of the lodge's curse, the dark heart beating beneath the forest, fed by the pain and sorrow of countless souls bound to this place. As Elias approached, the shadows coalesced into a towering figure, cloaked in darkness, eyes glowing with cold fire. The ancient presence spoke without words, its voice a crushing wave in his mind. "You have come far, bearer of light, but this is the final trial. To break the curse, you must offer what you hold most dear." Elias's heart clenched. He thought of the backward burning lantern, the talisman, the memories of those lost and the hope that had driven him here. The figure's presence was overwhelming, a force of nature and nightmare entwined. He reached deep inside himself, drawing strength from the journeys endured, the truths faced, and the shadows embraced. He lifted the talisman high, feeling the weight of all he had become. "I offer myself," Elias said firmly, voice steady despite the storm of fear inside him. "Take what you will, but release the forest and the lodge from their torment." The chamber trembled as the dark figure descended, its shadow enveloping Elias in a cold embrace. Time seemed to stretch and warp, memories flashing through Elias's mind, laughter and tears, love and loss, hope and despair, woven together in a tapestry of pain and resilience. Then a blinding light erupted from the talisman and the backward burning lantern, filling the chamber with warmth and radiance that shattered the shadows. The blackened tree groaned, its twisted roots unraveling like threads of night undone by dawn. The darkness screamed and faded, the curse breaking apart as the forest sighed in relief. The chamber softened, bathed in gentle light as the oppressive weight lifted. Elias collapsed to his knees, breath heavy but free. The forest outside seemed to awaken. The trees swayed with newfound life, the air crisp and clean, and the distant call of birds echoed like a promise. He had faced the heart of darkness and prevailed. But the journey was not over, not yet. The lodge still stood, its secrets unveiled but its future uncertain. Elias rose, ready to face whatever remained, knowing that the forest's whispers had changed, and that he was now part of its eternal story. As Elias rose from the floor of the heart's chamber, the warmth of the shattered curse still lingering on his skin, he felt an unfamiliar lightness, a weight lifted from not just the forest but from himself. The backward burning lantern in his hand now glowed softly, its flame steady and bright, as if no longer struggling against shadows but embracing them as part of a whole. The great blackened tree that had stood as the prison's core had withered into a scattering of silver leaves, floating gently to the chamber floor like the last sigh of a dying storm. The air smelled fresh and alive, filled with the faint scent of pine and earth, as if the forest itself had begun to breathe again. But even as relief flooded through him, a sense of urgency stirred in Elias's chest. The lodge itself awaited, its walls heavy with secrets and old magic, and somewhere deep within, the spirits of those bound to the place whispered of unfinished business. He stepped toward the heavy doorway leading back to the lodge's main hall, where his friends had waited, trapped in their own shadows and memories. Outside the chamber, the forest seemed transformed. Light filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled patterns on the mossy floor. The once oppressive silence was replaced by the gentle murmur of wind and the soft rustling of leaves. The black pines no longer loomed as ominous sentinels but stood as guardians renewed. Elias moved carefully through the forest, the backward burning lantern guiding his way as he made his way to the lodge's entrance. The building itself was still, yet alive, as if watching, waiting. Inside, the air was thick with the residue of old magic, but also hope. His friends, faces pale and weary, stood in the dim glow of the fireplace, their eyes reflecting both fear and gratitude. One by one, Elias reached out to them, sharing the warmth and light that now radiated from his talisman and lantern. As they touched them, the shadows around their hearts softened, their memories clearing like fog lifting at dawn. But the lodge still held one final secret, the true source of the darkness that had bound them all. In the deepest corner of the hall stood a forgotten mirror, cracked and tarnished, its surface shimmering with a faint inner light. The whispers spoke of it as the lodge's soul, a reflection not just of what was but of what could be. Elias knew that before the curse could be truly broken, he had to face this final reflection, confront the lodge's true heart. He approached the mirror, the backward burning lantern's flame steady in his grasp. The surface rippled like water, showing not just his reflection, but scenes of the lodge's past, present, and future, intertwined in an endless dance of shadow and light. The whisper came again, soft but clear. "This is the final choice, Elias. Will you free us all, or will the lodge remain a prison forever?" His heart pounded, the weight of the moment pressing down like the forest itself. With steady breath, Elias reached out to touch the mirror, ready to face whatever truth awaited him. Elias's fingers brushed the cool surface of the tarnished mirror, and the world seemed to shudder around him. The glass rippled beneath his touch like water disturbed by a stone, and suddenly he was no longer standing in the lodge's dimly lit hall, but inside the mirror itself, a realm of swirling shadows and fractured light, where memories and possibilities twisted together in endless patterns. Around him, the past unfolded, images of the lodge's original builders, men and women bound by oaths to guard the forest's secrets, their triumphs and betrayals, the pact made to contain the darkness beneath the black pines. Elias saw the birth of the curse, the pain and fear that had seeped into the wood and stone, growing like a cancer with every broken promise and whispered lie. Then the present, where he and his friends had been caught in the lodge's web, their fates intertwined with the forest's restless spirit. He saw his own journey, the trials faced, the shadows embraced, the light rekindled, and felt the weight of all that had been endured. But then the mirror showed him a choice, a vision of the future that was both terrifying and hopeful. The lodge freed from its curse, the forest healed and alive with light, or the lodge forever trapped in darkness, its whispers growing louder, binding more souls in an endless cycle of fear. The voice that had spoken before now came clearly, echoing through the mirrored realm. To break the cycle, you must choose to give something precious. Not a thing but a part of yourself. Only then can the lodge and forest be free. Elias hesitated, the enormity of the choice settling on him like a heavy cloak. To give a part of himself, his memories, his hopes, his fears, was to lose a piece of who he was. But to do nothing was to condemn the lodge and all who dwelled within to endless darkness. Taking a deep breath, Elias closed his eyes and made his decision. He reached into the swirling depths of the mirror and pulled forth a shimmering thread of light, his own essence, woven from courage, love, and sacrifice. He offered it willingly, the thread dissolving into the glass, illuminating the fractured realm with a brilliant, pure light. The mirror cracked and shattered in a cascade of shimmering shards, each one bursting into stars that scattered throughout the lodge and forest, touching every shadow and whisper with healing light. Elias felt the loss of that part of himself, painful yet freeing, as the weight of the curse lifted from his shoulders. The lodge sighed, the walls brightening, the air filled with the songs of birds and the rustle of leaves. Outside, the black pines swayed gently under a clear sky, their shadows retreating with the dawn. The forest was alive once more, free, breathing, and whole. Elias returned to the lodge's hall, his friends gathering around him, their faces alight with newfound hope and peace. The backward burning lantern's flame now glowed steady and warm, a symbol of the journey's end and the beginning of something new. Though a part of himself was gone, Elias felt whole, bound forever to the forest's whispers, its stories, and its light. The Black Pines Lodge stood silent but no longer haunted, a place of memory and healing, where shadows had given way to dawn. The newfound peace felt fragile, almost too delicate to last. Elias stood in the great hall of the lodge, the backward burning lantern's flame steady in his hand, but beneath his calm exterior, an unsettling awareness gnawed at him. The forest had changed. The black pines no longer whispered curses, but silence had taken root in corners previously filled with restless echoes. The lodge itself seemed to breathe differently, as if holding back secrets it had yet to reveal. Drawn by a sudden impulse, Elias knelt near the hearth, his gaze falling to the worn wooden floorboards. Something was off, faint vibrations, like a pulse beneath the oak planks, subtle yet insistent. Kneeling, he pressed his palm to the floor. A cold shiver shot through his arm, the wood thrumming with energy, alive in a way that defied explanation. He reached for the old iron poker lying nearby and pried at the floorboards. They lifted with surprising ease, revealing a narrow passage leading down into darkness. The air rising from the depths was thick and stale, tinged with the scent of earth and decay. Elias hesitated only briefly before descending. The passage was steep and claustrophobic, walls closing in with rough-hewn stone slick with moss and moisture. His backward burning lantern cast flickering shadows on the walls, transforming the narrow corridor into a shifting maze of light and dark. At the bottom, the passage opened into a vast chamber. The air was cooler here, heavy with the scent of damp roots and forgotten memories. The chamber walls were covered in ancient carvings, faces twisted in agony, figures bound by chains of thorn and shadow, and symbols pulsing faintly with a blue spectral light. Elias moved forward, his footsteps muffled on the soft earth floor. The backward burning lantern's flame dimmed slightly, as if struggling against an unseen force. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled, and a deep rumble echoed through the chamber. From the shadows emerged faint forms, ghostly figures tethered to the earth, faces full of sorrow and silent screams. They were the echoes, souls trapped beneath the lodge, bound by the ancient curse Elias thought had been broken. One approached, a woman cloaked in shadow, eyes hollow yet pleading. She reached out, her voice a whisper carried on the wind. "Release us, free the roots, break the chains." Elias's heart ached with the weight of their suffering. The lodge had not yet fully surrendered its hold. Somewhere deep beneath the forest floor, the roots of the curse still clung to life. Determined, Elias raised the obsidian eye and backward burning lantern, their combined light piercing the shadows. He spoke words learned from the silent watcher, a chant to soothe restless spirits and unravel dark bonds. The chamber filled with light, soft and pure, and the echoes began to fade, whispers turning to sighs, sorrow into peace. Yet, as the last figure vanished, the chamber trembled once more, and from the earth, thick roots began to twist and writhe, alive and growing. The curse had not died, it had only changed. Elias's journey was far from over. The chamber beneath the lodge seemed alive, a dark heart beating beneath the forest's skin. As the last of the echoes faded into peace, the earth groaned, and thick roots erupted from the soil, twisting and writhing like serpents in a fevered dance. Their bark was blackened, slick with a dark sap that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, and their tendrils snaked across the chamber floor, reaching hungrily toward Elias. He stepped back, backward burning lantern held high, its flame glowing fiercely against the growing shadows. The roots seemed to recoil slightly from the warmth, but their advance was relentless, spreading like a living tide intent on swallowing the lodge whole. From the depths of the chamber, a voice emerged, low, guttural, and filled with malice. It was the curse itself, a dark consciousness born of centuries of pain and forgotten betrayal. "You awaken what should sleep, the forest's sorrow, the lodge's death. You cannot escape the roots. They bind all who walk here." Elias felt a cold dread settle in his bones but refused to retreat. Instead, he gripped the obsidian eye tightly, feeling the talisman's ancient power thrumming in response. Drawing a deep breath, he began to chant, a melody taught by the silent watcher, a song of binding and release, light and shadow intertwined. The roots hissed and twisted, their advance slowing as Elias's voice grew stronger, weaving a web of light that pushed against the creeping darkness. The backward burning lantern's flame flared, bathing the chamber in a golden glow that forced the blackened roots to shrink and coil. For a moment, the battle hung in balance, the ancient curse fighting to survive, Elias's resolve shining like a beacon in the gloom. Then, with a final crescendo, Elias reached deep into the earth's sorrow, offering peace where there had been only pain. The roots trembled, their black sap turning to shimmering silver, their grasp loosening as light seeped into their core. The chamber stilled, the earth quiet once more. But Elias knew this was no end, it was a beginning. The lodge's secrets ran deep, entwined with the forest's soul, and healing would take time, sacrifice, and perhaps a price yet unknown. Rising from the chamber, Elias felt the weight of the journey press on him, but also the fierce hope that the lodge and forest might one day be free. Outside, the black pines stood tall against a rising dawn, their shadows retreating as the light broke through. Yet somewhere in the distance, a whisper stirred, carried on the wind. The roots remember. The morning sun filtered weakly through the thick canopy of the black pines as Elias emerged from the hidden chamber beneath the lodge. Though the roots' dark grasp had loosened, a shadow lingered in the air, an uneasy silence that spoke of unfinished business and secrets yet buried. Elias made his way back into the lodge, the familiar creaks and groans of the ancient building greeting him like old ghosts. His backward burning lantern flickered softly, its gentle light a comfort in the dim interior. He sensed the forest pulse outside, steady but watchful, as if waiting for his next move. His footsteps led him toward the staircase spiraling upward, to a place long forgotten by time and memory, the attic. The journal had hinted at it but offered no clear guidance, only an ominous warning. In the loft lies the seed of the lodge's shadow, wrapped in dust and silence. Pushing open the narrow door, Elias entered a space thick with dust motes dancing in shafts of light. Old trunks, shattered furniture, and forgotten relics filled the cramped room. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay and memory. As he explored, his fingers brushing over objects worn smooth by time, a soft whisper echoed faintly, a name he didn't recognize, carried on the thin currents of air. Drawn to a faded wooden chest tucked beneath a broken window, Elias knelt and pried it open. Inside lay a collection of brittle letters, yellowed photographs, and a small ornate box carved with ancient symbols that pulsed faintly in the backward burning lantern's glow. Opening the box revealed a tiny silver key and a fragment of a mirror, curved glass etched with strange runes that shimmered softly. A chill ran down Elias's spine. The fragment seemed to hum with power, its surface alive with shifting shadows. The letters told a forgotten tale, of a woman named Isolde, once guardian of the lodge's magic, betrayed and trapped by those she trusted. Her spirit bound to the attic, her sorrow feeding the lodge's curse. Elias felt the weight of her story settle on him, a thread connecting past and present, sorrow and hope. The attic's shadows deepened, and from the corner, a faint glow pulsed, a doorway opening into the unseen, beckoning Elias to step beyond. He gripped the obsidian eye tightly, the backward burning lantern's flame steady as ever, and stepped forward into the unknown. The morning sun filtered weakly through the thick canopy of the black pines as Elias emerged from the hidden chamber beneath the lodge. Though the root's dark grasp had loosened, a shadow lingered in the air, an uneasy silence that spoke of unfinished business and secrets yet buried. Elias made his way back into the lodge, the familiar creaks and groans of the ancient building greeting him like old ghosts. His backward burning lantern flickered softly, its gentle light a comfort in the dim interior. He sensed the forest pulse outside, steady but watchful, as if waiting for his next move. His footsteps led him toward the staircase spiraling upward, to a place long forgotten by time and memory, the attic. The journal had hinted at it but offered no clear guidance, only an ominous warning. In the loft lies the seed of the lodge's shadow, wrapped in dust and silence. Pushing open the narrow door, Elias entered a space thick with dust motes dancing in shafts of light. Old trunks, shattered furniture, and forgotten relics filled the cramped room. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay and memory. As he explored, his fingers brushing over objects worn smooth by time, a soft whisper echoed faintly, a name he didn't recognize, carried on the thin currents of air. Drawn to a faded wooden chest tucked beneath a broken window, Elias knelt and pried it open. Inside lay a collection of brittle letters, yellowed photographs, and a small ornate box carved with ancient symbols that pulsed faintly in the backward burning lantern's glow. Opening the box revealed a tiny silver key and a fragment of a mirror, curved glass etched with strange runes that shimmered softly. A chill ran down Elias's spine. The fragment seemed to hum with power, its surface alive with shifting shadows. The letters told a forgotten tale, of a woman named Isolde, once guardian of the lodge's magic, betrayed and trapped by those she trusted. Her spirit bound to the attic, her sorrow feeding the lodge's curse. Elias felt the weight of her story settle on him, a thread connecting past and present, sorrow and hope. The attic's shadows deepened, and from the corner, a faint glow pulsed, a doorway opening into the unseen, beckoning Elias to step beyond. He gripped the obsidian eye tightly, the backward burning lantern's flame steady as ever, and stepped forward into the unknown. As Elias crossed the threshold of the glowing doorway in the attic, the world shifted beneath his feet. The cramped, dusty loft gave way to a dim, endless corridor lined with ancient stones slick with moss and shadow. The air was thick and cold, carrying a faint hum that resonated deep in his bones, like the heartbeat of the lodge itself, hidden and vast. The backward burning lantern's flame flickered but did not waver, casting long shadows that danced against the walls. Each step echoed softly, swallowed by the heavy silence surrounding him. Elias knew this passage was no ordinary place but a hidden artery running through the lodge's very soul, connecting the past to the present, the living to the dead. Around him, faint whispers rose and fell like a tide, fragments of voices trapped between worlds, calling out in sorrow and warning. He followed the murmurs, pushing deeper into the shadowed passage, guided by the talisman's pulse and the lantern's unwavering glow. The corridor twisted and turned, leading to a vast chamber where walls shimmered with spectral light. At its center stood a great altar, carved from black stone veined with silver, covered in ancient runes that glowed faintly beneath Elias's gaze. Upon the altar lay a mirror framed in twisted vines of iron and glass, its surface rippling like liquid darkness. The fragment from the attic fit perfectly into a broken shard embedded in the mirror's edge, and as Elias placed it, the runes flared bright, illuminating the chamber with a fierce, otherworldly light. The mirror's surface pulsed, revealing visions of Isolde, the woman from the attic letters. Her face was pale and sorrowful, eyes filled with regret and a fierce longing for freedom. She reached out, her voice a soft lament. "I am bound here by betrayal and sorrow. Break the chains, and the lodge's heart may heal." Elias understood that freeing Isolde was key to unraveling the lodge's lingering darkness. But the mirror shimmered again, showing the price, a sacrifice of memory, of the parts of himself he had guarded most fiercely. Steeling himself, Elias reached toward the mirror, ready to face the truth that had haunted the lodge for generations. The backward burning lantern flared, the shadows recoiling, and the journey into the lodge's deepest secret began. The chamber pulsed with radiant energy as Elias touched the mirror, feeling a surge of warmth and sorrow flood his senses. The image of Isolde became clearer, her form shimmering with ethereal light, yet tethered to the shadows that clung like chains around her wrists. Her voice, a soft echo, reverberated in the stillness, filled with centuries of grief and longing. "You seek to free me," she whispered, "but the lodge's curse is not mine alone. It binds us all. To break these chains, one must offer what is most precious, a binding oath, a sacrifice sealed with truth." Elias's heart clenched. He understood that this was not a simple task. To release Isolde and dissolve the lodge's lingering darkness, he would have to commit fully, surrender a piece of his own essence, a memory or feeling he cherished deeply. Closing his eyes, he delved into his mind, searching the labyrinth of his soul. Images floated before him, the laughter of friends, the quiet moments beneath starlit skies, the warmth of hope in despair. A single memory shone brighter than the rest, a memory of his childhood, of his mother's gentle smile as she held his hand beneath a canopy of pine trees, teaching him the names of stars. With trembling hands, Elias offered this memory to the mirror. As the image dissolved into light, the chains binding Isolde began to crack, fragments falling away like brittle glass. The room filled with a chorus of whispered thanks, and the oppressive weight of sorrow lifted, replaced by a soft, hopeful glow. But with the gift came a price. Elias felt a hollow ache where the memory had once lived, a subtle loss that tugged at his heart but left him stronger, more connected to the forest's spirit. Isolde's form smiled, radiant and free. "Thank you, Elias. The lodge breathes anew because of your courage." The mirror shimmered once more, and the chamber began to fade, the corridor reappearing as the walls pulsed with renewed life. Elias knew that while one chapter had closed, others still awaited. The lodge's healing was a journey, but the darkest shadows had receded. Stepping back into the attic, Elias looked out at the black pines standing tall against a sky now bright with dawn. The whispers had changed, from sorrowful echoes to gentle promises carried on the wind. The lodge was no longer a prison but a guardian, a place of memory and renewal. Elias tightened his grip on the backward burning lantern, feeling the steady warmth pulse in time with the forest's heart. The journey was far from over, but now hope burned brighter than ever. The air outside the lodge had shifted in the hours since Elias's binding oath had freed Isolde's spirit. The once oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a crisp, almost electric charge that prickled at his skin. The black pines themselves seemed to hum softly, their ancient trunks resonating with life renewed. But beneath this fragile peace, a restless energy brewed, like a storm gathering at the edge of the horizon. Elias paced the creaking wooden floors of the lodge's main hall, the backward burning lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. The faces of his friends, once pale and haunted, were now tinged with cautious hope, yet even they sensed the unease that slithered just beyond their vision. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth turned loose. The forest darkened beneath rolling clouds, the whispering voices growing urgent, tangled with warning and fear. The lodge's windows rattled as thunder growled in the distance. Elias stood before the fireplace, watching the flames dance and spark, feeling the raw power of nature gathering strength. Suddenly, a knock echoed from the heavy front door, a deep, slow rap that resonated like a pulse in the charged air. Elias opened it to reveal a figure cloaked in a dark cloak, face obscured beneath a hood. The visitor's presence was unexpected, yet somehow inevitable. "I have come," the stranger said, voice low and steady, "to warn you. The darkness that haunted the lodge has stirred elsewhere. It has grown, fed by shadows beyond the forest. The roots of the curse run deeper than you know." Elias's grip tightened on the lantern. The stranger stepped inside, revealing a face lined with years and wisdom, eyes sharp and searching. "The balance is breaking," the visitor continued. "If the lodge's heart is to heal, others must stand against what approaches. The forest is but one battlefield in a war that stretches across realms." As the storm raged outside, Elias and his friends gathered close, the weight of the stranger's words settling over them like a thick fog. The lodge, once a prison of shadows, had become a beacon of hope, but the true fight was just beginning. The night stretched long, filled with whispered plans and the gathering of courage, as the black pines bore silent witness to the coming storm. The storm outside raged with relentless fury, wind tearing through the black pines and rain lashing against the lodge's weathered walls. Inside, the fire sputtered but refused to die, its warm glow a fragile shield against the creeping darkness that threatened to seep through every crack and crevice. Elias and his newfound companion, the cloaked stranger who called herself Melis, sat close to the fire, the backward burning lantern casting steady light between them. Melis's eyes, sharp and ancient, flickered with knowledge and unspoken sorrow. "The lodge was never just a prison," she began, voice low and grave. "It was a shield, a barrier forged to keep something far worse from spilling into this world. The curse you broke was only a symptom, a fragment of a greater darkness that festers beyond these woods." Elias listened intently, heart pounding. The forest seemed to hold its breath as she spoke, the whispers outside hushed as if waiting for her to finish. "There are places beyond the black pines where shadows gather, pockets of ancient evil that twist and corrupt all they touch. The roots you fought bind not only this lodge but a network of forgotten gateways. The forest's curse was a lock on one door, but many remain unlocked." A shiver ran down Elias's spine. The backward burning lantern's flame flickered, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. "Why have you come now?" Elias asked, voice steady despite the growing dread. "Because the darkness grows bolder," Melis replied. "It senses the lodge's weakening. It seeks to spread, to devour the light rekindled in your heart. You will need allies, knowledge, and strength beyond what you have yet found." She stood and moved toward the window, rain streaming down the glass like tears. "The fight is just beginning, Elias. The black pines may hold secrets, but they are only the first chapter in a much larger story." As thunder cracked overhead, Elias felt the weight of her words settle deep within him. The forest was no longer just a place of mystery and haunting, it was a battleground. The lodge's whispers had become a call to arms. The night pressed in, thick with possibility and peril. Outside, the shadows waited. Elias stood by the window, rain dripping steadily outside, the storm's fury a mirror to the turmoil within his mind. Melis's warning weighed heavily on his thoughts. The lodge's curse was only a fragment of a deeper darkness sprawling across the land. If the black pines were the first chapter, then the story had just begun. As dawn broke, a thin gray light seeped into the lodge, casting pale shadows over the worn wooden floor. Elias knew that to face the growing threat, he would need allies, those who understood the forest's ancient magic and the forces that sought to consume it. Melis revealed a secret long buried beneath layers of silence. "There is a circle," she said softly, "guardians bound by oath, protectors of the old ways and the fragile balance between worlds. They live scattered, keepers of lore, warriors of light, and seekers of truth. Finding them will be perilous, but without their aid, the lodge's salvation is impossible." Elias's eyes narrowed with determination. "Where do I start?" "Begin with the Elder Grove," Melis replied. "A sacred place deep within the forest, where the oldest trees stand like sentinels. There the first guardian awaits, a woman named Leora whose sight pierces shadow and time. The journey would be dangerous. The forest, though healing, remained unpredictable. The paths twisted like serpents, and the shadows held secrets eager to test the resolve of any who dared walk beneath the black pines." Elias prepared for the trek, gathering provisions and fortifying the lodge with wards Melis taught him, runes and charms to keep the dark at bay. The backward burning lantern, now a symbol of hope and resilience, flickered brightly as if sensing the importance of what lay ahead. As he stepped outside, the rain softened to a gentle mist, and the black pines stood tall and silent, their branches brushing the sky like ancient hands reaching for the dawn. The forest whispered around him, alive with possibility and danger. Elias knew that every step toward the Elder Grove was a step deeper into the unknown, a test of courage, faith, and the will to protect all that remained. The journey to find the circle of guardians had begun. The forest air grew thick with moisture as Elias ventured deeper beneath the towering black pines, their ancient limbs entwining overhead to form a dense canopy that filtered the morning light into mottled patterns on the forest floor. The path was faint, a narrow ribbon of earth carpeted with moss and fallen needles, winding between gnarled roots and shadowed hollows. The scent of damp wood and wild earth filled the air, mingling with the distant call of unseen birds and the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Every step felt heavier, the weight of the forest pressing in, both a sanctuary and a challenge. Elias's backward-burning lantern cast a steady glow, illuminating patches of the trail where mist curled like spirits rising from the soil. The forest was alive in a way that transcended mere trees and animals. It breathed with a soul as old as time, whispering secrets only those willing to listen could hear. Hours passed. The shadows deepened as Elias traversed tangled undergrowth and crossed babbling brooks whose waters shimmered with an otherworldly light. The journal Melis had given him was his guide, its pages inscribed with cryptic symbols and sketches of the Elder Grove, a sacred clearing where the oldest trees stood sentinel over the heart of the forest's magic. At last, the path opened into a vast glade unlike any Elias had seen before. Towering trees with thick, silver-barked trunks stretched skyward, their branches woven into a cathedral of leaves that shimmered with faint luminescence even in daylight. At the center of the clearing stood a stone circle, worn smooth by centuries of weather and time. Moss and flowering vines crept over the ancient stones, and in their midst, a figure knelt in quiet contemplation. Leora. Her presence was commanding yet serene. She was tall, her hair the color of autumn leaves, eyes deep and knowing, reflecting the wisdom of countless seasons. Draped in robes embroidered with forest motifs, she seemed as much a part of the grove as the ancient trees themselves. Elias approached cautiously, the backward-burning lantern's flame steady but respectful. Leora's gaze lifted slowly, fixing on him with calm intensity. "You carry the flame," she said softly, "the light born from shadow and sacrifice. The lodge's tale has reached these woods, and the balance teeters on the edge." Elias bowed his head in acknowledgement. "Melis sent me. The lodge is healing, but the darkness beyond grows restless. I seek your guidance and your strength." Leora rose, extending a hand that was both gentle and strong. "Then you shall have both. But understand this, protecting the forest is not just a battle of strength or magic. It is a test of spirit, heart, and unyielding will. The roots of shadow run deep and their reach is long." She led Elias to the stone circle's center, where ancient runes glowed faintly beneath his feet. The air hummed with power as Leora began an incantation, weaving words from an age before memory. The ground beneath them pulsed, and the trees around the grove seemed to lean inward, their leaves whispering in an ancient tongue. Elias felt the forest spirit stirring, an awakening that rippled through every leaf, branch, and root. "You are now part of the circle," Leora said, her voice both a promise and a challenge. "Together we will stand against the encroaching shadow. But the road ahead is fraught with peril. You must be prepared to face what lurks beyond the black pines, and beyond your own fears." As the incantation faded, the glow of the stone circle dimmed, but Elias felt something shift inside himself. A newfound strength tempered with humility and resolve. The journey to save the lodge, the forest, and perhaps even the world had only just begun. Beyond the Elder Grove, the shadows waited, watching, patient, and hungry. The air hung heavy with tension as Elias and Leora emerged from the sacred Elder Grove, their footsteps silent on the mossy earth. The forest around them seemed to pulse with unease, the vibrant life that had filled the black pines now tinged with a creeping shadow that slithered just beyond the edge of sight. The distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, a warning that the calm was fragile, fleeting. Leora's eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the horizon. "The darkness moves faster than we anticipated," she murmured. "The lodge's curse was but one thread in a vast web. Now the spiders have stirred." Elias tightened his grip on the backward-burning lantern, its flame unwavering even as the wind began to howl through the trees. "What do we face? Not just the shadows within the forest, but something older. Something that seeks to unravel the very fabric of this world. The lodge is a beacon, and it has drawn their attention." As they walked, the forest seemed to close in around them, branches twisting like grasping fingers, the shadows deepening and writhing with unnatural life. Strange whispers echoed on the wind, half-formed words and chilling promises that set Elias's heart pounding. Ahead, the outline of the lodge emerged, its windows dark and silent against the storm-blackened sky. Yet Elias knew this was no ordinary home. It was a nexus of power and peril, a place where the boundaries between worlds thinned and frayed. Inside, his friends waited, their faces pale but resolute, the warmth of the fire a fragile shield against the growing night. Together they would stand, bound by oath and courage, to face the encroaching darkness. The backward-burning lantern's flame cast long shadows on the walls, a flickering symbol of hope amid the gathering storm. Outside, the black pines whispered warnings and the forest held its breath. The final battle was near.